Welcome, everyone. If you're listening, you likely share our fascination with the past, with those whispers that reach us across centuries.
And today, we're stepping into something special, a sort of mytho-academic salon, you could say.
Exactly. We're focusing on these really enigmatic artifacts, the Orphic gold tablets.
Ah, yes. These incredibly fragile, thin sheets of gold. Mostly found in ancient graves, aren't they? Southern Italy, Thessaly.
And Crete, too, which is interesting in itself, these islands of myth.
Definitely. And what's kind of wild is how relatively recent the serious scholarship is. I mean, finds happened earlier, but people really started digging into them, academically speaking, around 1879.
Before that, they were just curiosities, almost lost echoes.
Pretty much. So these gold leaves, buried with people long ago, they resurface and suddenly pose this incredible puzzle.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're relying on scholarly analysis, basically. People trying to figure out who these individuals were, why they had these tablets, what the texts actually mean.
And crucially, what religious context they fit into. Or perhaps what contexts, plural.
Because there's no single answer, is there? That's part of the allure.
No, absolutely not. The interpretations are all over the map, really. Lots of debate, which honestly makes it more interesting.
So our mission today, for all of us here, is to navigate that landscape. We want to explore the big questions these tablets raise, look at the different scholarly takes.
Treating them like pieces of this intricate, maybe even sacred puzzle. Trying to glimpse a lost worldview through these tiny golden windows.
Perfectly put. Okay, so where does the story really begin? Thurii.
Yeah, 1879, Thurii in southern Italy. That's a key moment. Tombs are opened, and out come these, well, astonishingly delicate gold pieces.
And some of the first ones, A1, A2, A3, they had this recurring line, didn't they?
They did. Pure, I come from the pure. It's such a powerful statement, isn't it? Like a claim of a spiritual status right at the threshold of the afterlife.
Almost defiant, yeah, asserting purity as you enter, well, whatever comes next.
And then nearby, another one, A4, starts differently. But when the soul leaves the light of the sun.
That one sounds more like instructions, almost. A path to follow. It mentions turning right, I think.
Yes, a direction for the soul's journey. Very evocative. And found with A4 was lamella C1.
Ah, the infamous soup of letters.
Exactly. Just this jumble of signs, completely indecipherable, a perfect symbol of how much we don't know.
It really underscores the mystery. But then someone did start putting pieces together. Comparetti.
Domenico Comparetti, yes. In 1882, he made a really pivotal connection. He looked at these Thurii finds and linked them to a tablet found even earlier, decades before, in Petilia.
The Petilia tablet. That's a really famous one. Source bro.
That's the one. It has that unforgettable line. I am the child of earth and starry heaven. Such a cosmic claim of parentage.
Belonging to both worlds, the chthonic and the celestial. What else did it say? Something about springs.
Right. It describes two springs in the underworld. One on the left, the spring of Lethe, forgetfulness, that's the one to avoid.
Okay.
And one on the right, the spring of Mnemosyne, memory. That's where the soul needs to drink.
Remember, to retain its identity.
Presumably. And crucially, the tablet gives the deceased the exact words to say to the underworld guardians. Declare your divine parentage, child of earth and starry heaven, and ask for water from memory's spring.
Like a password.
Exactly, a password for passage, maybe even for a better afterlife.
And Comparetti took this imagery and connected it to the Titans. That seems like a leap.
It was definitely interpretive, but quite brilliant in its way. He linked it to the myth where the Titans kill the infant Dionysus, and Zeus then destroys them with lightning. Comparetti saw this reflected in lines from the Thurii tablets, too.
So he built this whole theory, an Orphic doctrine, based on inherited guilt from the Titans.
Sort of an Orphic original sin, yeah. He drew support from the Neoplatonist Olympiodorus, who wrote centuries later, mind you.
Right, Olympiodorus is 6th century CE, so Comparetti is projecting that back.
He's using Olympiodorus' account, which links humanity's creation to the ashes of the Titans who consumed Dionysos to frame these much earlier tablets. He argued they showed a belief in metempsychosis, the soul's cycle through lives, driven by this ancient crime.
Wow. So he's weaving together the Petilia tablet's divine claim, the Thurii tablet's hints, the Dionysus myth, into a coherent Orphic system.
Precisely. It was an incredibly influential synthesis, attempting to map out a whole lost spiritual tradition based on these fragments.
And this was happening during a time when Orphism itself was heavily debated.
Oh, absolutely. You had, sort of simplifying, two main camps back then. On one side, someone like Creuser, who saw Orphism as this ancient secret wisdom full of allegory, maybe even with roots in India, primal theology, basically.
Like finding hidden depths everywhere.
Kind of. And on the other side, you had Lobeck, the great skeptic, pouring cold water on the idea of hidden meanings, demanding more concrete proof.
So a real tension between, let's say, mystical interpretation and rigorous philology.
Exactly. And most scholars were somewhere in between, but Comparetti's Titanic interpretation really resonated. People like Diederik picked it up.
Diederik used it for his work on the catabasis, the descent into the underworld.
Yeah, he saw these tablets as evidence for a secret Orphic catabasis narrative, and even traced its influence into early Christian ideas about the end times.
That's fascinating. And others followed. Rhodo, Harrison.
Yes, Erwin Rhode in his massive work, Psyche, Jane Harrison in her Prolegomena, they both incorporated Comparetti's framework. His narrative about the Titans, Dionysos, and the soul's journey became a really dominant way to understand a certain strand of Greek religion.
So Comparetti's theory kind of solidified for a while.
It did, and more tablets started turning up, which seemed at first to fit. 1893, in Crete, they found shorter tablets.
Shorter versions of the Petilia one.
Yeah, basically hitting the key points. Child of earth and starry heaven, the spring of memory, that declaration of lineage. Just more concise. Similar ones popped up later in Thessaly too.
Suggesting maybe a wider circulation of these core ideas or phrases.
Possibly. Then, 1903, a tablet found in Rome, A5. This one was really interesting because it seemed to link the two main types Comparetti had identified.
How so?
It starts with the pure, I come from the pure line, like the Thurii tablets.
Okay.
But it also explicitly mentions Mnemosyne, memory.
Ah, so it combines the purity theme with the memory spring.
Exactly. And this Rome tablet is quite late, 2nd century CE. But for Comparetti, this was proof of this underlying continuous Orphic tradition, maybe a single sacred text evolving over time.
It really cemented his view, didn't it?
It certainly helped. His interpretation became pretty standard, especially once it was included in the big collections of Orphic fragments by Diels Krantz and later Kern. For a long time, if you talked about Orphism, you were likely talking about this Comparetti model, Titanic guilt, Dionysian rebirth, and these gold tablets as the prime evidence.
This whole discussion about Orphism and mystery cults was also tied up with understanding early Christianity back then, wasn't it?
Very much so. Scholars like Macchiaro, building on Comparetti, almost framed Orphism as a kind of countercurrent to mainstream Greek religion, something potentially parallel to, or even influencing, early Christian thought.
And as Graff points out, these interpretations weren't happening in a vacuum. They reflected contemporary debates about religion, history, the relationship between paganism and Christianity.
Absolutely. The way scholars constructed this Orphism said as much about their own time as about antiquity. But this elaborate construction, this perhaps over-elaborated picture of Orphism, it eventually led to a backlash.
The pendulum swings back.
Right. You get the rise of what scholars call the Pan-Orphist camp, those who saw Orphism everywhere, a major unified movement.
And the Orpheoskeptics.
Exactly. Those who questioned if Orphism as a single coherent religion ever really existed, echoing Lobeck from decades earlier.
Where did the tablets fit in this new debate?
Right in the middle, as always. Linforth, a major skeptic, actually omitted them entirely from his big book on Orpheus. Just didn't even classify them as Orphic.
Wow, that's a statement.
It is. Whereas Guthrie, who was more sympathetic to the Pan-Orphist view, relied heavily on the tablets in his work. So they remained this crucial, contested evidence.
They just refused to be easily categorized.
Precisely. And then, just as this debate was really heating up, came a truly major discovery. 1975, Hipponion, back in southern Italy.
Tablet B10, what was so special about this one?
Several things. First, it seemed really early, possibly late 5th century BCE. Second, it was the longest, most complete version of the Child of Earth and Starry Heaven text found to date.
Okay, so a much fuller picture.
Much fuller. And its timing, coming shortly after the Dervini papyrus discovery, just poured fuel on the fire of the Orphism debate.
What does the Hipponian tablet actually say that's new?
It gives more narrative detail. It mentions a grove of memory, as the guardian's asking the soul why it's come down to the gloom of Hades.
So a dialogue.
A bit more of one, yes. And it includes this promise that the soul will travel a sacred road alongside other Mystaya Bashoi.
Initiates and followers of Dionysos, that's explicit.
Very explicit. It adds a lot more texture to the journey and the community aspect.
And then things got even more complex. Paulina.
Yeah, 1987, Paulina in Thessaly. 2 tablets, D1 and D2, shaped like ivy leaves.
Ivy leaves. Definitely points towards Dionysus.
You'd think so. And the text on them is different again. It focuses explicitly on Dionysus, calls him Bacchios, and talks about dying and being reborn.
Birth. Okay. What about those strange lines, the milk ones?
Ah, yes. A bull you rushed to milk, and a ram you fell into milk. Really enigmatic slogans. They echo a weird phrase on one of the Thurii tablets, but here the context seems strongly Dionysiac.
So maybe connecting Orphic ideas more directly with Dionysiac rituals, especially with the Hipponian tablet mentioned Buffalo.
It certainly strengthened that line of inquiry. It suggests the boundaries might have been quite fluid, and more finds kept adding layers. Thurii, also in Thessaly, tablets D3 and D5.
What did they reveal?
More variations. They seem to contain mystic passwords, like Andripedo Thyrsu.
Which means?
Nobody's entirely sure. Maybe man-child Thyrsus. It's debated. And invocations of Brimo, a powerful goddess often linked to Demeter or Hecate.
So bringing in other deities now.
Right. One Thurii tablet even says the bearer took part in rites of Demeter and the Mountain Mother. It really diversifies the picture, making a single, unified Orphic explanation look trickier.
It sounds less like one system and more like a shared pool of symbols and ideas used in different local contexts.
That's certainly one way scholars are looking at it now. And then you have the really short tablets found in Thessaly and Macedonia. Some just have a name.
Just the deceased's name.
Or the word Mistes, initiate. That's Group F. And others, Group E, have short greetings to Plauton and Persephone, rulers of the underworld.
Simpler messages, less narrative.
Exactly. Which means they're harder to analyze semiotically, to unpack the meaning in the same way as the longer narrative tablets like the A, B, and D types. They might come from the same general world, but they don't give us as much to work with textually.
So all these new discoveries, they must have reignited the big debate.
Oh, absolutely. You still have scholars like Bernabe, who's done an amazing new critical edition of all the tablets.
Right, collecting and organizing everything.
Exactly. And he continues to argue for a coherent underlying Orphic tradition that generated all these variations. He groups them into those 6 categories, A, B, C, D, E, F, based on content.
Pure, child of earth, the weird Thurii one, Dionysus Demeter, greetings, names Mistes. Okay.
But others argue that the differences, especially between the Thurii, Rome, and Paulina texts, are just too significant. They suggest multiple origins, different local cults perhaps using shared motifs. The question Edmonds poses is still central. Looking at a tablet, who are you? Where are you from?
A question for the soul and for the scholar.
Precisely. And new approaches are helping. Literary criticism, interdisciplinary work, semiotics, looking at the language itself, the structure, the performance implied.
And the archaeology you mentioned finds. Does the context they're found in tell us anything?
Hugely important, though often neglected in the past. Josephopoulos done great work summarizing this. Where the tablet is found, what else is in the grave, cremation versus inhumation.
Yeah.
It all adds pieces to the puzzle.
Like what? Any examples?
Well, some B-type tablets are associated with cremations. The Paulina D tablets were found in a sarcophagus burial. Some of the short F tablets were just a gold coin with a name, placed in the deceased's mouth.
Wow, okay. So the burial rite itself might connect to the specific text or type of tablet used.
It suggests that, yes, the physical context is part of the meaning, and the essays we're drawing on really dig into these connections.
So Graph, looking at them within broader Orphic eschatology.
Right. Bernabe, comparing them meticulously to other Orphic material.
That's looking for parallels in philosophy, even early Christianity.
Dusa, considering Egyptian links, Sieropoulos focusing on the Cretan context specifically.
Yeah.
It's this multifaceted approach.
And the semiotics people, Calamé, Riedweg, Edmonds, Ferrero, what are they uncovering?
They're looking at the text as a system of signs, thinking about hypothetical original texts or text that these might derive from.
Trying to reconstruct the source code almost?
In a way, Riedweg tries to reconstruct one and imagine the ritual setting. Edmonds suggests maybe the B tablets weren't excerpts from a big narrative, but short, standalone oracle texts.
Like something a traveling priest might give out.
Possibly. And Herrero makes this fascinating comparison. The soul declaring its identity to the underworld guardians is structurally similar to how Homeric heroes declare their lineage.
Asserting who you are through your ancestry, that resonates.
It does. And then Aben looks at the poetic language itself, its performative quality, how it worked in a ritual, Farone zooms in on the non-hexameter parts, those weird slogans.
The milk lines again.
Yeah, connecting them to specific Dionysiac myths and rituals, perhaps separate from the main hexameter narrative.
So many angles, so many layers. But still no smoking gun, no ancient text saying here's what the gold tablets mean.
Sadly, no. There are no direct contemporary references explaining them. And that lack of external commentary is why the interpretations can range so widely.
Which is frustrating, but also kind of wonderful. It keeps them alive, keeps us guessing.
Exactly. It's precisely the ambiguity, the fragmentation that makes them so compelling, so strange and sacred and intricate, as you said earlier.
So we've journeyed through these texts, these scholarly debates. It's like piecing together a mosaic where half the tiles are missing, but the image you glimpse is still incredibly powerful.
Beautifully put. And even without definitive answers, the exploration itself, this process of engaging with them, it keeps yielding new insights, doesn't it? Into how people long ago faced death, what they hoped for, how they sought meaning.
A conversation across the millennia carried on these tiny scraps of gold.
It never really ends.
So maybe the question for our listeners as they reflect on all this, as these delicate leaves whisper across time, what forgotten echoes of our own, maybe universal, yearning for meaning in the face of mortality? What echoes might they stir within the labyrinth of your own understanding?
What ancient thoughts might find new ground in your own reflections today?
Something to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Imagine, if you will, sifting through stardust. Each tiny speck, a sort of glittering fragment of ancient thought. Today, we're venturing into the Orphic cosmos. It's this realm where, the whispers of myth echo through history's corridors.
Yeah, and where ritual kind of dances with language itself.
Exactly. Think of it like charting a constellation, where all these seemingly separate points of light, you've got historical records, myths, linguistic puzzles.
Right, they all sort of coalesce around this one central, luminous figure, Orpheus.
And our map, our guide for this, is this really intricate text, Making Port Storm, Part 14, Orphica Magica IMD.
Yes, and it really, really plumbs the depths of what we even mean by Orphism. It's multifaceted.
It is. So we're not just, tracing the steps of the musician.
No, not just the myth.
We're looking at Orpheus as a kind of gravitational center, maybe, pulling in all these diverse cultural, religious expressions.
That's a great way to put it, a focal point.
So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to trace some of the key threads that this source lays out. We want to explore Orphism's evolution.
Yeah, how it changed over time.
Its interactions with other belief systems, which are fascinating, and the really varied forms it took.
So this is our curated journey then, through some pretty complex ideas.
Exactly. A curated exhibition. Let's hope for some aha moments along the way.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with how our understanding has, shifted.
Good idea. The source points out how classical philology, the traditional study of ancient texts and language, started to broaden out.
Right, it wasn't just about grammar and etymology anymore. New perspectives came in.
Like Black Athena, for instance, which really challenged some standard narratives about ancient Greece.
And just generally, this move towards interdisciplinary work, it shook things up, didn't it? Led to fresh takes.
It absolutely did. It's like the old script suddenly felt incomplete.
Made people look beyond just the big texts and monuments, ask new questions.
And a really key point from our source, drawing on West, is this idea that Orphism might not even be a single religion.
Oh, what is it then?
More like a fashion for claiming Orpheus as an authority.
A fashion? Wow, that's quite a reframing, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests that instead of some unified Orphic church, you've got different groups, different people.
Across different times and places.
All invoking Orpheus's name to, give weight to their own ideas and practices.
So the history becomes the story of this fashion, this enduring appeal. Interesting.
Which then leads to this really compelling idea of a non-literary Orphism.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? Rooted in oral tradition.
Precisely. In lived culture, particularly in places like Southeastern Europe, Thrace.
Right, and this connects to Foucault's ideas about authorship, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the idea that a name, like Orpheus, even without a single historical person behind it in our sense, could still function as this powerful symbol. It grants authority, legitimacy to texts or ideas associated with it.
Ah, I see. So the name itself becomes the vessel for cultural weight, especially in societies relying on oral transmission.
Exactly. The source suggests Their actual behaviors, spoken doctrines, rituals were the spark.
And these diverse expressions from these oral cultures eventually got written down.
Right, coalesced into written forms, all attributed back to Orpheus.
So the myths, like the Zagreus story Onomacritus compiled,
Yeah.
they weren't necessarily the origin, but maybe more like commentary, a way to frame a tradition that was already alive.
That's a really crucial distinction the source makes. It separates this ethnos orphism
The oral, lived tradition.
from literary orphism, which is based more on that mythical authorship and the initiation rites the educated Greeks observed and wrote about.
Okay, so two streams, maybe related but distinct, both claiming Orpheus.
Yeah, two different ways of tapping into that Orphic wellspring.
So we've got this shifting picture moving from maybe one thing to something more fluid, regional. Now let's navigate towards Plato.
Ah, Plato. How do these Orphic ideas ripple into his philosophy?
Well, the source looks at Bernabé's reconstruction.
Right, drawing from different dialogues.
Wow.
What does he find?
He points to things like secret writings attributed to inspired poets like Musaeus, Orpheus,
Yeah.
often linked to initiations.
Okay. And what do these writings teach?
Things about the soul's immortality, its inherent guilt, maybe connected to that Dionysus dismemberment myth.
The Zagreus story again, perhaps?
Could be. And also this really striking image, the body as the soul's tomb or grave, somasima.
Right. The idea that being alive isn't really living, but more like being dead.
Sort of, yeah. But crucially, also the possibility of purification, rituals to wash away that guilt.
Purification seems key, doesn't it? Keeps popping up.
It does. And what's really interesting here is the contrast the source draws
Between what?
between the sort of Hellenic literary philosophical view of the soul, sometimes passive, blown by winds, and the oral Orphic idea, where the soul is more like active intellectual energy, part of the cosmos.
And we see evidence of that latter view in things like the gold lamellae, those burial tablets.
Exactly. And that inscription of King Cotys the First, they suggest a more dynamic soul concept.
So Plato engages with Orphic ideas clearly, but maybe filters them, changes them a bit.
Seems likely. The text suggests he distinguishes the mythic Orpheus, the ancient source of secret wisdom.
From Orpheus, the actual writer of poems.
Right. Separating the deep oral doctrine of immortality from maybe a more polis-friendly version.
Okay. And building on that, Sabatucci talks about two Orpheus, is that right?
Yeah, that's another fascinating layer. The Thracian one.
More like God.
Kind of. And the Greek one, the poet, the singer, the cultural hero we know.
Right. And this connects potentially to Socrates.
How so?
Well, maybe Socrates embodies a kind of Thracian Orphic metoikesis, that migration or transmigration idea.
Explaining his utopia, his strangeness, his otherness in Athens.
Possibly. It offers a lens maybe for why he seemed like such an outsider sometimes.
Wow. That really highlights how complex this figure of Orpheus is. Layers upon layers.
Absolutely. Okay, so where does our dive take us next?
Into the magic.
Yes, the magical thread, which, let's be honest, is often the most captivating part for many people.
Can't deny that. So the source emphasizes bringing in the magical papyri now.
And other related materials, yeah. As crucial new evidence for understanding that ethnos, that Thracian Orphism.
Okay, this is where the standard stories start to shimmer a bit differently, right?
Definitely. Orpheus isn't just a poet or religious figure anymore. He's one of several authorities.
Like Musaeus, Epimenides, Linus.
Exactly. Their names were invoked to give rituals this air of ancient authenticity, legitimacy.
And the source says the claim of authorship itself was a technique, even for anonymous sacred books.
Yeah. The power wasn't necessarily in who wrote it, but in the revered name attached to it.
Interesting. So the name carries the weight, and the source even suggests using shamanism as a term here.
As a technical term, yeah.
Yeah.
To help differentiate the ethnos from the polis's Orphism.
And maybe understand how Greeks borrowed from non-Greek cults.
Right, and this is where we see connections being drawn. Race, Ionia, the Pontic region, even Scythia.
In how Bacchic cults developed, and these shamanistic elements.
Like dismemberment and reconstruction motifs, spirit journeys, things found across that wider cultural zone.
Right, not just Greek. And there's this idea of the Hyperborean diagonal.
Yeah, sort of visualizing that cultural flow. The early Greek influence in Thracia Ponica linked the literary Orphic rituals to places like Miletus and Athens.
Okay, that laid the groundwork. Then in the 4th century BC, things spread more.
They did. A big increase in the spread of Orphic faith and ritual, which the text suggests might have led to its, quote, profanation.
Meaning it became maybe too popular, less secret.
Possibly, and this is pegged as the origin point for what becomes Orphica Magica.
So as practices became more widespread, maybe they look more magical to outsiders, losing some older religious feel?
That seems to be the implication. And then we get these figures, the ambassadors of light in oral culture.
Magical officiates.
Yeah. Transmitting cosmogony, myth, religious models, all aimed at individual knowledge.
The experience of the immortality.
That seems to be the goal. And it sounds quite aristocratic, esoteric, using theurgy, maybe secret languages like in Samothrace.
So less about myth and parable, more direct experience.
Perhaps at that level. And the magical language itself is described as really versatile.
How so?
Terminological, parabolic, instructive, allegorical, descriptive, all making the knowledge of immortality accessible for initiates.
And it has creative power through naming.
That's what the text emphasizes. To name something is to bring it into focus, maybe even into being.
We see hints of this early on, like in Euripides.
With the epidai, those incantations, yeah.
And Plato later gives philosophical explanations, but Ionia seems to keep more of that mystery feel.
In the gold lamellae, the Derveni papyrus, Olbian inscriptions.
Right, and then we have the magical hymns from the Greek papyri.
These really show that the magical component was integral, don't they?
Absolutely. Hymns to Apollo, Hecate, Helios, Selene, linking Orphic theology directly to magical practice.
And Guthrie's thesis fits here. That literature helped legitimize Orphic ritual for the Greeks. Yeah, with written spells acting as sort of hidden instructions for the magic.
Even Linforth, who was skeptical about a unified Orphism, he still acknowledged the magical power tied just to Orpheus's name and charms, saw it as a big part of Orphic literature.
Right, it couldn't be ignored. And finally, West's point about cosmic music.
Simulating it in rituals, like chanting vowels.
Yes, with the idea being that this sound could help the soul escape, return to the divine.
Wow. Sound is a pathway to transcendence. That's powerful.
It really is. So when we try and weave all these threads together, what do we see?
Well, certainly not something static or monolithic.
No. It's dynamic, incredibly adaptable. It changes over time, crosses cultures.
You've got oral traditions, literary texts, philosophy, and this deep magical current.
All held together somehow by this figure of Orpheus.
It's definitely not a neat religious box, is it?
Not at all. More like that luminous nebula we mentioned.
Yeah.
Ideas and practices swirling around this endlessly compelling center.
So, thinking about those blurred lines, myth, ritual, magic, what does that suggest? About, the human desire to connect with the unseen.
And how we shape reality through both intellectual ways and maybe more experiential or artistic ways.
That's a really profound question to ponder. And maybe, if Orpheus embodies that search for knowledge through art and esoteric means, how might that ancient figure still speak to people today? To contemporary seekers, artists, those looking beyond just the rational?
That's a fantastic thought to end on. It certainly gives us, and hopefully our listeners, a lot to reflect on.
For sure. And if anyone's curiosity is sparked, diving into the source material we discussed or related topics.
Absolutely, we encourage it. Consider it an open invitation to continue your own deep dive.
It's a rich field, definitely worth exploring further. Welcome to the deep dive. You're probably joining us with that real hunger for understanding complex stuff, but wanting to explore it without feeling lost.
That desire to really dig in.
Exactly. And today, we're plunging into ancient Thrace, this really fascinating, though kind of elusive thing they call Thracian Orphism.
It's like finding a forgotten frequency, isn't it? A hidden part of early European thought.
Think of it as a private viewing of some rare artifacts, scholarly books, archaeological hints.
Right, and we'll be placing those considered views next to what the ancient Greeks themselves said, which is often fragmented, maybe biased.
It's like looking at a jewel from different angles, seeing different facets.
Precisely.
So our quest, our deep dive mission here is to try and illuminate what made Thracian religious thinking unique.
Trace its connections with Greek culture, listen for echoes in the archaeology, the texts.
Yeah, conjure up a picture, even if it's a bit enigmatic sometimes.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to unravel this?
I think the groundwork really is a distinction the source material makes early on, separating ancient Greek mythology from ancient Greek religion.
Oh, right, which often get blurred together.
They do, but the argument is myths are more like, literary creations, born from specific social, political contexts, stories shaped by tellers.
Okay, so not just a direct mirror of religious belief, maybe interpretations, even like creative riffs on it.
Exactly. And the source stresses that Hellenic religion itself wasn't this single unified thing.
Not like, say, early Judaism or Zoroastrianism with a really defined structure and doctrine.
No, not a centrally planned temple complex, as you put it earlier, which leads us to a key tool, interpretatio thracica.
Right. What does that involve? It sounds significant.
It is. It's not just gathering facts. It's more nuanced. It means looking at evidence through time, through meaning how things evolved.
So modeling possibilities, like sketching out their practices, their beliefs.
Kind of, yeah. Reconstructing the lost melody from the fragments, as you said. And crucially, it stresses the connections between things.
Okay, so it demands bringing different fields together.
Absolutely. Interdisciplinary, archaeology, linguistics, literary analysis. You need to weave those threads together.
Not just putting a pot next to a quote from Homer.
No, synthesizing the insights, getting a richer vision.
Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. The idea of paideia, which isn't just education, is it? It's more like the whole cultural atmosphere, behavior, attitude, the way people are.
Exactly. And the proposition is that Thracian Orphism can be seen as a distinct paideia, one born from the interaction, sometimes friction, between Thracians and Hellenes.
Like a unique art style emerging from a collision of different ways of doing things.
That's a great way to put it. Orality meets literacy, different values, different social structures. Aristotle's broad ethne, the peoples, versus the defined city-states, the polis.
And it highlights this shift in understanding. Thrace wasn't just passively receiving Greek culture.
No, it was contributing, actively shaping what we think of as Hellenic spiritedness. It wasn't a one-way street.
Fascinating. Then there's this lovely idea about metaphors.
Yes, that humans and gods communicate through metaphors, these kind of veiled but revealing messages.
Which leads to the core problem the book tackles.
Yeah.
Can the metaphors from Thracian Orphism, from their meta-history, their deep narrative, can they actually be understood through written texts?
It's a huge question, a translation issue across different modes of thought, really.
Like trying to capture a dance in musical notation.
Yeah.
Something's lost, maybe something else is gained.
A perfect analogy. And to even start, the text says we need to recognize two main ways of thinking back then.
Okay.
The literary mode, tied to the polis, the city-state, and the non-literary mode, linked to the ethnos, the broader people or tribe.
This isn't just about who could read, it's deeper.
Much deeper, fundamentally different ways of seeing and processing reality, stemming from oral versus written historical memory.
Right, so the literary polis mode that encourages linear time. Sequence, cause and effect, like history or philosophy.
Precisely, that step-by-step thinking. And it shapes the socio-political space, even the language itself. Think linear B, that was a huge act of this kind of sequential thought.
Encoding paideia so it lasts. On tablets, in art, architecture.
Yeah. Then you have the non-literary ethnos mode, which feels different, more immediate.
Like grasping an idea or image all at once. Monoscenic, synoptic thinking, it says.
Yeah.
Thinking the thing.
Yes. And this non-literary memory, in that interplay between polis and ethnos, it often works in ways writing might miss.
They're interwoven, though, not totally separate.
Definitely interwoven. But that single, powerful, thoughtful idea connects directly to a synoptic grasp of the whole. It lives in mythological time.
Which is permanent becoming, always shifting. And this is the space of faith.
Exactly. Then we get daemonian thinking. And we need to be careful here. Daemon isn't just demon.
Right, it's more like an intellectual mediator, a bridge between human and divine.
That's it. And this mode produces cyclic time patterns, eternal return, life, death, rebirth, the common going through, the shared journey.
And they talk about anthropodaimonization, elevating humans like Orpheus, Zalmoxis, Rhesus to this status.
Yes, and it wasn't random. It was seen as Taisha, a kind of destined principle of faith, a cosmic nod to those embodying certain truths.
Particularly resonant for Orphic aristocrats in Thrace, seen as eudaimons blessed at death, part of that cycle.
Then briefly, agonistic time. Elective thinking, the space of aloneness.
But not just isolation, more like purification, embracing suffering to gain knowledge.
Right, but personal journey can be ecstatic or enthusiastic depending on the divine energy involved.
And finally, epiphanic thinking, the God appearing.
In doctrinal time, the space of illumination, the God within or the God transcendent, leading to different initiations, the Dionysus Agreus embrace or the Apollos Abasios ascent.
And doctrinal time itself isn't simple. Heroic the dead becoming mediators, gradual preparation with a teacher. and spiral.
Unique to Orpheus, they suggest, symbolized by his dismemberment, his song echoing beyond death in the Logos.
Okay, so this brings us to ethnosness. The text makes a point of distinguishing this from modern ethnicity.
A very important distinction. It's not about borders or bloodlines in our sense.
It's about a state of being, rooted in that non-literary oral historical memory.
Precisely. Within Aristotle's ethnocebalist framework, it's that foundational understanding passed down orally that shapes these different ways of thinking, these different concepts of time and space, and how they interact.
And Thracian ethnosness is particularly visible because Greek writers, starting with Homer, engaged so much with Thracian oral traditions, translating them in a way.
Exactly. It makes Thrace a unique window into that non-literary worldview, but it wasn't just one-way traffic.
No, Thrace was influenced by Hellas too, a complex exchange.
Definitely varied across different Thracian groups and areas, a mosaic.
And to show this interplay, the text points to 3 inscriptions, like little poems etched in silver.
Yes, very evocative. First, from the Rogozan treasure, King Codicai calling himself a child and servant of Apollon.
A Thracian king aligning with a Greek god, representing the solar aspect of the great mother goddess's sun. That's a deliberate blending.
Sophisticated doctrinal understanding, syncretism. Then the Gedi Philae inscriptions, Kodioi's mother Aureas and Kodioi's Helios.
Suggesting a Thracian Phrygian connection. The great mother goddess is the mountain, her son is the sun.
It points that way, yeah. A deep Euro-Micronesian link through orality. And then there's the Hyperborean diagonal.
Like a spiritual ley line, marked by sacred mountains, Pangaeus for Rhesus, Kogion for Zalmoxis.
A kind of spiritual axis for European oral Orphism. And communities across Greece, the Black Sea, southern Italy resonated with this ancient axis.
So the term Thracian in Thracian Orphism isn't just geographical.
Not rigidly, it's more conceptual, a classifier, defining that Southeast European ethnosness behind the Orphic faith, non-polemolist, non-literary, non-philosophical at its core.
A specific way of being spiritual, really.
A tenacious Southeastern European way, which leads to this profound idea. There is no word without teacher.
Underscoring the vital role of the guide, the initiator. And this connects to internal Hellenization.
Yes, that cultural shaping moving north from Crete, assimilating earlier peoples like Pelasgians and Thracians. But within that, the teacher emerges.
Seen as maybe daimonios, touched by the divine, holding the key to the Epidae.
Exactly, and the Epidae isn't just a simple charm, it's sung, chanted, keened. A sung theogony even, with real power, reincarnation power maybe, like in Aeschylus.
Plato's Charmides mentions a Thracian healer using it, taught by Zalmoxis, right? Harmonizing soul and body.
And notice Zalmoxis is put alongside Orpheus, these Hyperborean figures, shared lineage.
So the believer isn't just Greek versus barbarian. It's about their capacity to hear, to see, but also to carry the message, an active role.
Very active, which hints at a difference in emphasis. Greek Orphism often focused on practices.
Whereas Thracian Orphism is presented more as a teaching, offering answers about salvation, the alternative.
Yes, answers sought above the sources, in the unspoken metaphors, the hidden messages, a deeper, more esoteric layer.
The text then mentions a contact informational space way back in the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC.
Right, pre-migration cultural linguistic communities forming. And among their elites, a shared conceptual language developed tied to power and faith.
And this oral Orphism showed up in many ways during Hellenization. Rock-cut sites, megaliths.
Bullish, wolfish, dragonish practices, the Delphic Reform, Samothracian mysteries with their sacred language, Eleusinian mysteries.
Yes, it's an undercurrent.
A pervasive one. The Zagreus rightness, the bullish stuff, seems key to seeing this oral paideia distinctly from polis culture.
Yes, and finds of dismembered remains in Thracian burials that suggest daimonian thinking, cyclic time, placing the dead in the space of faith.
Sometimes with animal limbs swapped in, suggesting transformation, reincarnation.
It hints strongly that way. And finding sacred objects linked to Zagreus, like the 7 toys.
That points to epiphanic thinking, placing the dead in doctrinal time, the space of illumination.
Exactly. The mirror becomes a potent metaphor here too, reflecting Zagreus' dismembered body and cenotaphs, maybe. A silent symbol. And the Deer's Artemis rite shows how one image can spawn many names, and one name many images in non-literary memory.
Activated by different senses within specific time-space frames, especially in that Thracian Phrygian contact zone.
Which brings us to Melina. The Orphic hymn to her is a prime example of this one image, many names idea.
She's chthonic, born of Persephone and both Zeus and Pluto. dual-bodied.
Associated with phantoms, shifting faces, darkness and light, hostile winds, the hymn asks for her to be kind.
And her name itself, Molino, only appears here. It connects to words for soothing, offerings, purification rites, melian, malia, meligma, a pacifier of the underworld.
So the idea is, Molino, as a named rite, is just one name for the chthonic Great Mother Goddess in oral Orphism.
That's the argument. And her fluidity, her lack of a fixed myth, might be because changing the prosopon, that mask that's more than a mask, was an Orphic way to change essence.
And this prosopon idea echoes in archaeology. Bronze Age vessels with faces, those golden masks found across a wide area.
Yes, including that Hyperborean diagonal, though whether the practice was originally Greek is debated.
Then Mycenaean Thrace comes up again. Not geography, but a type of ethnos organization. Oral Paideia, mid-2nd to mid-1st millennium BC.
Distinct from Mycenaean Hellas, evidenced by things like the Balchitran gold, the later big burial sites.
And during this time, golden prosopa and lemulae appear on the dead, signifying transformation.
A change in quality, shedding other identities, entering heroic doctrinal time, the space of illumination, becoming anthropodaemons.
Orphic immortality marked with gold, representing cosmic balance for the deceased themselves.
Right, and the Molino hymn doesn't create a literary myth because it connects logos and dramenon, word and ritual action. Done, spoken, out-manifested.
Action, naming, reincarnation, initiation, all linked from that single plural Orphic core.
So Molino highlights that tension between orality and literacy, just like the different debated meanings of Orpheus's name itself, which don't seem tied to a specific rite.
It's through figures like Zagreus and Sabazios, we see the rightness of Dionysus more clearly.
Exactly. Zagreus linked to the nocturnal hunter, bullish rites. Sabazios to Phrygian Sabas, the rock, a chthonic black versus solar white-blue-white.
Resolved by sacrificial blood. And the Orphic color symbolism from Plato's Timaeus. Color is flame, Orphanos is black, white, red mixed.
Yes, Orpheus is Orphanon affair, signifying his magus power, distinguishing magic and religion with oral Thracian Orphism having priority.
And the sacrifice of Dionysus Dagrius, the hierogamy, moves through black, red, white Orpheus. Life, death, beyond cycle.
Precisely. This leads to the stasis of myth, how remembering differs. Written memory leads to epic didactic forms.
While oral memory in Thracian Orphism is more gradual. Distinction, knowing, naming.
And myth itself evolves in literary settings, epic, poetic, dramatic, mythography, philosophical takes.
Petronius quipped that fear made the gods.
Ah, yes. But the Orphic view is different. The dying reborn god isn't born of fear, but maybe hesitation, apprehension before divine energy.
This hesitation before the divine complexity gives rise to the gods. Physical polytheism, naming functions tied together by moral monotheism, the unity behind the forms.
That's the idea. So the sons of the Great Mother Goddess have no fixed ethnic origin in these contact zones. Divine energy is free, namings are interchangeable depending on the thinking time space.
Thracian Orphism as the faith of the named. Fear belongs to those who can't trust enough to name.
Exactly. The text warns against simplistic linguistic links, like Nagy's Baltic Slavic thunder gods idea for this time frame. Pyrrhiki, ancient Thrace, might name the sun rock.
And the Grecising of this sun rock theory shows up in inscriptions. Homer's Pyrrhos linked to Hittite Pyrrha, making a Trojan Thracian leader a son of the sun.
And King Acamas equated with Ares, the king priest embodying Ares doctrinally.
Fear blocks understanding the metaphors. The Thracian believer accepts the Great Mother Goddess Sun pair has shifting meanings based on their faith position, a different way of knowing.
Now, those golden Orphic tablets placed on the dead, the Cretan ones named Zanzu Zagreus, show Egyptian influence maybe? Naming, dismemberment, hoped for reunification.
Which fits Crete's rock landscape, its rock faith. Sacred caves, maybe figurines replacing human sacrifice. Zagreus' name maybe even in linear B.
Possibly. And archaeoastronomy at Pitsophis shows an 8-year cycle. Sun, moon, birth, linked perhaps to Minos consulting Zeus every 9 years in a cave.
A pre-literary echo of oral ethnos' Orphism, preserved later in the Thracian Tetractys.
Seems likely. The Thracian Tetractys, 4 phases of the Great Mother Goddess, 3 of the Sun, 3 of the Son of the Sun, 10 in total, mirroring the Pythagorean cosmos.
So the Eleftima tablets, not just memory versus oblivion. If read with the Codes inscriptions, Vios means soul. The questioner is the teacher.
That's the interpretation. The verses hold an immortality doctrine, later kind of watered down in Hellenistic writing, where becoming an anthropodaemon is just a hope, not a doctrinal achievement.
The Thessalian ivy leaf lamellae call the dead Macarios, thrice blessed, tell Persephone Bacchus deliberated him.
And the bull milkrum, milk lines, record Zagreus' rightness. Wine is Dionysus's honor, anticipating afterlife sacraments.
The Pharsalos tablet is longer. The dead calls himself a Pei, child of earth and sky, aligning with the Thracian king-priest tradition.
Yes, based on the idea that a god's name should express essence. Other names can dismember it. Believers want to know the limitless God.
So Orphic rightness is polynomial, polymorphous, outside the core doctrine. But the teacher's name is constant, holding faith. Epiphany is theophany.
The initiated carries the God, becomes a theophor heading to the beyond. Encoded records name the God's essence, but hide the teacher and the full nature of Mnemosyne carrier of knowledge, not just memory.
Okay, the South Italic tablets, Hipponium Locrian colony, Thracian Pelasgian roots, venerating the great mother goddess as Persephone. Lamp in the grave means initiation.
Seems so. Reference to Mnemosyne's grave marks the transition to the beyond, where remembering becomes knowing. Death of the soul sounds like later literary stuff.
Deceased is son of Jerry and Uranus, appeals to the chthonic king Dionysus Zagreus. Declares himself Mystis Kaibachos individual initiate, united with other thrice blessed.
The Petilia tablet repeats Cretan Pharsalos formulas, but uses Pe for the child of Uranus, carrying that son of the sun vision from oral tradition into writing.
And the Thuri Tumuli Timpone Grande and Piccolo, non-Greek Etruscan like Thracian mounds.
Very similar. Timpone Grande burial suggests heroization, silver medallions, gold lamellae boxes.
But the 3 gold tablets from Timpone Piccolo, the pure goes to the chthonic queen, unnamed great mother goddess Orphic Cosmos.
That's the reading, naming Euclus and Eubulius Zagreus and the kingly initiate and other gods' daemons, showing that god-daemon fluidity.
The goat falling into milk, Zagreus' death new birth cycle, confirmed by Timpone Grande Tablet A, where the dead becomes god from man through faith in that cycle.
It all seems to connect. Then the 5 bone plates from Olbia, 5th century BC, from Zeus' sanctuary.
Plate 1, life, death, life, truth, and Asekov faith in Zeus Dionysus.
Plate 2, peace, war, truth, lie. Imgur, 7 rectangles, letter Z. Maybe Dionysus Zagreus as heptad in sacred marriage. Knowledge through death is peace.
Found in Thracia Pontica, a bicultural zone with little mythology, representing the esoteric faith of that society.
Likely. Now, returning to Eliad. The text critiques using shamanism too broadly for Orpheus.
Right, it's a specific Tungusian term. Clio, Hiscu's muse, calls Orpheus a singer-teacher, creator of a faith doctrine.
And Thracian art focuses on funeral, initiate, mysterial themes, unlike Scythian art showing daily life. Suggests deeper doctrinal faith in Thrace.
The text also stresses the past is alive in the Balkans. Needs first-hand engagement, not just remote study.
And it pushes back against seeing Thrace as just a meeting place or dress shide, a cultural turntable.
Acknowledging interaction, yes, but asking why the Thracians produced specific forms of techne, skilled making. What was their understanding of divine invisibility expressed through these signs?
Exactly. Shift the focus to Thracian thought. What did they think using these objects? Southeastern Europe as a permanent contact zone shaped Thracian paideia culture, behavior, attitude, where orality met Greek literacy.
So Thracian sites and objects are techne expressing ethos, ethics, norms, not just art. Even in Polis, Greece, this holds. Fortified places, tombs, pottery, metalwork.
And we need to distinguish in fortified production, reflecting Greek views, from by technique production, needing different tools to understand.
Which leads to a new methodological approach for decoding image ideas at this orality literacy crossroads.
Yes, abandon terms like cult, mythology, religion for right, parable, faith teaching, distinguish practical, ritual, doctrinal functions, contain hidden connotations, not just images.
Concordance of all languages of the object, situated in different thinking time space frames. Concordance of speechless languages with Greek Latin texts.
Consider influences as supplements, not prime causes. Form the whole of non-literary memory through paideia.
And the key to decoding this whole, this knowledge system, isn't just in the ground, the archaeology. It's at the level of culture historical reality.
Where ritual and doctrinal functions drive paideia. So Rita aren't just about drinking in Persia, it's deeper.
Indo-European parallels like Dumizel Iliad have limits, might flatten diverse paideia.
True. The king's role is central to the ethnos' reality. The ethnos-state ideology links esoteric and popular faith via rites, logoi. Herodotus shows this general reverence, but kings venerate Hermes specifically.
The Tetractys again. Based on 4 elements, but fire is the inner source, polymerized, multifunctional, sun, fire, sun as the being of faith.
And a Samothracian Tetractys, Exicursa, Exioris, Exicursus, Casmilis, Cadmilos, matches Herodotus' Thracian one. Artemis, Dionysus, Ares, Hermes.
Hermes, ethephalic, suggesting self-conceiving hierogamy and initiation, binding Great Mother Goddess, son of the sun.
Seems likely. The royal Orphic oath to Hermes, like the Samothracian Epoptes, signifies that deep sacrament of visualized sacred marriage. The Orphic king enters union with the goddess, completing the cosmos socium, mythologically, sun, and doctrinally, son of the sun.
The Samothracian Cabaroi names also fit Herodotus' Tetractys. Great Mother Goddess, Axiocursus Artemis, son, Axios Dionysos, son of the sun, Axiocursus Ariae.
And time, space, and Samothrace, gods in mythological time. Initiation process and cyclic time, Anacteron Hieron. Doctrinal time covers purification, intronization, symbolic self-sacrifice, the dance, the oath on the platform, maybe involving blood washing.
Hesychius' note on Coes Latae priest purifying a murderer, later seen as from blood, sin, but maybe originally with blood, symbolized by the new Epoptes wearing red.
It's suggestive. A mysterious sanctuary is experienced differently depending on the time of initiation. Samothrace architecturally is a completed cosmos, Orphic Pythagorean. Its rightness is the Tetractys becoming manifest.
And the sacred language there, Thracian, Pelasgian, Minoan, linear affines. Linguistics alone can't solve it.
The key question is, who is called to Epiphany, and how? Likely through parole words, invocations holding the great mother goddess sun essence.
Hippolytus says Samothracians called Adamna Seismion, venerable. Hesychius equates Adamna with Attis, beloved, venerated. Links to awe before God, connects Attis Adamna to the sun Helios.
So the Epoptes Orphic oath probably held a secret word, a code, for the sun, maybe the goddess. Revealed in mythological time to reach doctrinal time, a logos rite.
Hermes Cadmilos is the exoteric version in Samothrace and the Odrysian Oath. Orphic Hymn 28 has Hermes in the goddess's cave, prophet of the Logos, with the fearful weapon of the tongue, echoing the unspoken eros sacrament of the oath.
It seems plausible. Now, the myth of Zagreus, Onomacratus wrote it using Hesiod Homer's Titans for literary effect.
But the text argues this was working on a pre-existing Orphic ethnos' rightness. Alemion's philosophical take, Zagreus' in J, is closer to the initiate's view.
Archaeology in the Valley of Thracian Kings near Kazanluk. Those mason buildings under mounds linked to Odrysians, are they just tombs built by Ionians? The text questions this.
Kazanluk tomb, Maglas, Cran, others, paintings, horse sacrifices, architecture, color codes, reflecting Zagreus Sabazios rituals. Some maybe sanctuary Haruns, continuing Mycenaean rock-cut traditions.
Very likely. Astrusian Modula is huge. Sarcophagus-shaped room from granite, solar circles, frescoes. A sanctuary room for the anthropodaemonized King Orphic for 800 years, used for initiations, supported by nearby rich burials and shushmanettes. Colossal stone structure, sacred space, sacrificed horses, dogs, divided entrance, stone door with sun discs, beehive room, central column touching a sun disk, walls in 4+3 zones.
An architectural ritual copy of Macrobius' Sabazios Oracle Sanctuary, linking to Rhodo-Baroque temples.
That's the interpretation. Sabazios' mystery clarified by Iamblichus preparing for Bachism, purification, liberation from guilt, not metempsychosis. Sabazios names the beyond. Zagreus is the chthonic being of faith in oral Orphism.
Higher Orphic initiation uses elective thinking, self-concentration, daimonian thought, trusting life des beyond. The son of the sun gets immortal illumination in doctrinal time.
Starocell temple, large, royal, triumphal stairs, antechamber, beehive chamber, pseudo-columns, that sacral 4+3+3 fifth 10 module again, like Svashtari tomb.
Sanctuary Hirun for Orphic king and nobles, confirmed by burials nearby, shows oral Orphic faith decoded via writing and archaeology.
Seems to fit. Teaching is remembering. Faith in the spoken word is ritual agon. Initiation is learning proper naming to reach knowledge.
Zagreus faith, being in suffering. Sabazios faith, going through it. Together, Orphism is trust and deathlessness via the believer's mediation.
Transition from doctrinal to astral initiation into divine memory knowledge. Training for remembering in different times. Non-articulated essence appears through the how, when, where of namenesses, shaped by non-linear thought.
The initiation technique involves dialogue. Believer's logos metaphor meets the anticipated divine one. Iamblichus sees Hermes guiding logos and faith.
And this whole interplay of orality and literacy is key for understanding remembering as the path to deathlessness, especially for the Dravini papyrus.
Often seen as the text of literary Greek Orphism, but the source urges caution. Similar papyrus at Calydus suggests a function like pectorals, golden tablets, a bicultural circulation along the Hyperborean diagonal.
Possibly, and the Dravini necropolis itself. Grave B with the crater is near grave A with the papyrus. Challenges a purely philosophical reading of the papyrus.
Grave B's colors red, Ragni, branch ships, goddess's grove, dismembered teacher, cremated man, woman, gold coin ring, pins, suggest aristocratic men's Orphic society.
It points that way, making the Dervini papyrus an intersection of Thessalian orality and Macedonian literary tradition. Fits the silent namednesses idea.
The concept hyperbaton, transgress word order, suggests the danger of misunderstanding, interpretations going astray.
A useful caution, column V of the papyrus fairly intact. Author questions disbelief in Hades' terrors, inability to understand dreams.
Asserts that those who don't learn or know can't believe. Equates faith with knowledge of divine essence. Terrors of Hades as literary convention hiding the purgatory mystery.
That's the reading. Column the sixth seems to list sacraments, namings from oral Orphic initiation. Prayers and offerings appease souls. Links to Maligma, Melino, Souls Daemons, Erinius Menides.
Power of Epidei by Magoi to change hindering daemons via sacrifices, compensation, water, milk, cakes for innumerable souls.
Mistai make preliminary sacrifices to Eumenides as souls, bird offerings needed before sacrificing to gods in soul's name.
The Magoi here, not just Iranian borrowing, represents the teacher-initiator compelling divine benevolence. Persian magos equals Greek teacher exegete, epidos, synonyms.
Plausible, contrasting religious behavior, literary memory supporting state, with oral Thracian Orphism, trust in deathlessness.
Gods must be compelled to accept trust as a ritual stasis, like those inscriptions. Exion etepu, I became God from man.
Differentiating ecstatic Thracian aristocratic technique and enthusiastic exoteric Hellenic technique Orphic states.
The Dervini teacher, likening himself to Persian Magoi, suggests connection between stages. Heraclitus' oracles in the text temper purely initiatory readings.
Yes. Clement of Alexandria mocks Heraclitus' clients, Magi, Bacchi, initiates, as night wanderers threatened by fire, but it highlights their shared carrying of the god, links Mistai with Bakoi, the case with Dionysus Thyrsus.
Zagreus is missing from Clement's list. Maybe he's the general image of believers carrying the god. Graf uses Catullus' epigram, Persian Magus born of Motherson, to suggest the Orphic child servant anonymous teacher vision.
Points to the sunfire, Apollo Dionysus, dual hypostasis. Magoi can change daemons, mediate between divine energy and believer achieving immortality via sacrifices, compensation, libations, offerings.
Dionysus' son and great mother goddess ritually named through libation liquids, cakes offered by Mistamagoi to Erinius Eumenides Souls Daemons.
So as we wrap this up, Thracian Orphism emerges as this distinct paideia, right? Rooted in orality, interacting with Greek culture, but not just derived from it.
Yeah, Interpretatio Thracica, those different thinking time spaces, the power of naming, metaphor, archaeology and text revealing this complex system. Great mother goddess, her sons, achieving immortality through initiation knowledge.
We've definitely touched on some unique things. That nuanced view of myth and rite, the crucial role of the teacher, balancing scholarly rigor with metaphorical insight.
Trying to interpret this strange, sacred, intricate material. It really requires that blend.
Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps, for our listeners. Given this fluidity of identity, this power of naming we've explored in Thracian Orphism, how might these ancient ideas resonate today with our own contemporary sense of self, belief, in a world just saturated with shifting narratives, digital personas? Does it echo somehow?
That is something to chew on. A really provocative question to end with. Indeed. Until our next exploration into the depths, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something really fascinating. These ancient texts swirling around Hermes Trismegistus. Now, usually when we pick up a book, we look for the author, right? That one person.
Yeah, that's the modern instinct, definitely.
But with these ancient texts, it's like that whole idea just dissolves. Anonymity, pseudonymity, it was, well, almost the default setting. And you suggested that trying to pin down an author here might even be, well, impolite to the material itself.
Impolite might be a strong word, but maybe misleading. You know, it's like trying to find the single source of a river. Sometimes the focus on who wrote it distracts us from, well, the river itself, the ideas flowing through these texts.
Okay.
So for this deep dive, our first job really is to understand the texts themselves, how they even got to us before we chase after specific authors. We need to map the currents first.
Map the currents. I like that. So, okay, where do we start? We know the Corpus Hermeticum, many listeners probably do, but what else is out there? What are these other streams?
Right. Well, beyond the corpus, there are three main sources we should probably look at. First, there's the perfect discourse. also known as the Asclepius.
The Asclepius, right?
Yeah.
And that one survived mainly in Latin, hasn't it? Not the original Greek.
Exactly. Mostly a 4th century Latin version, kind of a paraphrase in parts. We only have bits and pieces of the Greek and maybe some echoes in Coptic. But the fascinating thing is, it was clearly very widely read back in late antiquity.
Like an encyclopedia of Hermetic thought for its time.
Sort of, yeah. It covered a lot of ground. And the fact it survived so well in Latin, even when the Greek vanished, tells you something about its influence. It really resonated.
And why did the Greek vanish? Any ideas?
Well, the usual suspect is a Byzantine censorship. You know, a big text full of openly pagan ideas. That would definitely attract the wrong kind of attention later on.
Makes sense. And didn't the Asclepius also contain that prophecy about Egypt's decline?
It did. A really powerful passage where Hermes foretells this dark future for Egypt. Adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so that's the Asclepius. What's next?
Next up, we have the Armenian definitions of Hermes Trismegistus to Asclepius. These pop up much later in medieval manuscripts.
Armenian. That's interesting. How did they get there?
The thinking is they were translated from Greek, probably as part of that whole Hellenizing school movement in Armenia, you know, an effort to translate key Greek texts.
And what are they like? The definitions?
They're very different in style. Think of them as like short, sharp definitions. Little nuggets covering key Hermetic ideas, God, the cosmos, the soul, that sort of thing.
So more like a handbook or a glossary.
Kind of, yeah. But the really interesting thing is how the content overlaps with other Hermetic texts, even a fragment we have from Stobaeus. It suggests this wasn't a fixed, rigid system.
So it points to that textual fluidity you mentioned. Ideas being shared, maybe rephrased, moving around.
Precisely. It reinforces that feeling of a living, evolving tradition, not just static books, more like a shared current of thought being channeled in different ways.
Okay, Asclepius, Armenian definitions. What's the third source?
The third category is what scholars call testimonia. Basically mentions, quotes, references to Hermetic ideas in other writers from late antiquity.
Both pagan and Christian writers.
Yeah, both. We'll probably dig into those testimonia more later, but just knowing they exist is important. They give us glimpses of how people outside the core Hermetic circles were reacting to these ideas, engaging with them.
Right, external perspectives.
Yeah.
Helps build a fuller picture.
Exactly. It shows Hermeticism wasn't just operating in a vacuum. It was part of the wider intellectual conversation of the time.
Now, something else that jumped out from the sources.
Yeah.
This undercurrent of, well, tension. Specifically anti-Greek sentiment. But expressed by Egyptians, sometimes in Greek texts. That feels complicated.
It is complicated and really fascinating. It's like this hidden layer of resistance, isn't it? A critique woven into the very language they were often forced to use.
Why were they using Greek if they felt that way?
Well, Greek was the lingua franca, right? The language of scholarship, administration, culture across the Eastern Mediterranean. So if you wanted your ideas to circulate widely, you pretty much had to use Greek.
But they suspected the language itself.
Deeply suspected it seems. There's this feeling that something essential, something vital from their own Egyptian tradition was getting lost or distorted when put into Greek words. Not just meaning, maybe, but something more fundamental.
And this leads to that incredible passage in Corpus Hermeticum 860, right? Where Hermes, or Asclepius channeling him, basically says, my books will be messed up when you translate them into Greek.
Yes. It's an astonishing statement. It's not just about bad translation, it's a claim about the inherent nature of the languages themselves.
What's the claim?
The belief expressed there is that the original Egyptian language, it wasn't just conveying information, the actual sounds, the intonation, the quality of the voice, these things were thought to carry an intrinsic force.
A force. Like magical power.
Maybe not quite magic in our simple sense, but an inherent energy, a direct connection to reality. It's like the sounds themselves participated in the things they described, a kind of sonic reality.
Wow, okay. And compared to that, Greek is?
Greek gets slammed pretty hard in that passage. It's called empty speech, just for showing off. Greek philosophy is dismissed as noisy talk.
Ouch. That's blunt.
It is,
Yeah.
and they contrast it with the Egyptian sounds full of energy. You really feel this defensive posture, this anxiety that the core, the essence of their wisdom, is somehow untranslatable, vulnerable to being trivialized by this other dominant language.
A deep worry about cultural transmission, losing something vital.
Absolutely. It raises huge questions about translation, doesn't it? Can the soul of one language, one worldview, ever truly live inside another? Especially when they're so different. What gets lost?
Yeah, profound questions. And this anxiety about language seems tangled up with another big theme. That prophecy of Egypt's decline we mentioned from the Asclepius, the gods leaving.
Yes, it's a powerful, recurring lament in these texts. This idea that Egypt will face a time of darkness, that the divine presence will withdraw.
Is it like the end of the world? The gods gone forever?
No, and that's crucial. It's portrayed as a temporary abandonment of Egypt. The gods go back to heaven, but the idea is they will return after a period of cleansing, maybe flood, fire, disease.
Oh, so a purification.
Right, and even after all that, Egypt is still seen as the true home of the gods. It's a cycle. Decline, purification, renewal, not permanent annihilation.
Okay, cyclical, but the description of that decline,
Wrong.
it sounds absolutely horrific for the people living through it.
Oh, it is. The texts paint a grim picture. Foreigners ruling the land, the ancient sacred rites neglected, even forbidden. The land filled with tombs, not temples. The Nile itself, the lifeblood overflowing with actual blood. Egypt becoming a desert.
A wasteland. And the people.
The surviving Egyptians are described as alienated. You can still recognize them by their language maybe, but their behavior, their spirit is utterly changed, foreign even to themselves. It leads to this overwhelming despair.
Foreigners in their own land? That's bleak.
Utterly bleak. And Hermes describes this despair in chilling detail. People become weary of life itself. They stop seeing the wonder in the cosmos. They actually start to scorn it.
Preferring darkness to light.
Yes. Death starts to look better than life. And values get completely flipped upside down. The pious person is seen as crazy. The impious one is considered wise. Total inversion.
A world turned inside out.
Exactly. And then you get these evil angels or malevolent demons mixing with humanity, pushing them towards crime, war, robbery, chaos. It's like the spiritual breakdown unleashes these destructive forces.
Driving people to ruin.
Pretty much. And it's not just human society that suffers. The cosmos itself reflects the chaos.
How so?
The texts describe the earth becoming unsteady, the seas unnavigable, stars falling out of their proper courses. Even the seasons get disrupted. The voices of the gods fall silent. Fruits rot, the soil becomes barren, the very air turns sick and polluted. It's like the whole natural and cosmic order unravels along with Egypt. The source mentions this echoes the kind of curses found on tomb inscriptions against violators, but magnified to a cosmic scale. A reversal of all the hymns praising the gods and the ordered world.
The microcosm and macrocosm falling apart together.
Precisely. That interconnectedness is key in Hermetic thought. Egypt's suffering isn't isolated. It shakes the whole structure of reality.
Now, the source material draws a parallel here, doesn't it? Between this ancient prophecy of cultural collapse under foreign influence and, well, much later experiences of traditional societies meeting Western colonization.
It does make that comparison, and it's quite sobering. When you think about the shock, the loss of meaning, the way a traditional society's whole symbolic universe can crumble when confronted by a vastly different, powerful culture, the parallels are hard to ignore.
That descent into despair, the loss of faith in the old ways.
Yeah, it suggests maybe there's a recurring pattern here in how cultures react to that kind of overwhelming contact and disruption.
The examples given are pretty harrowing. Those described as relatively primitive societies, seeing their social structures decay, roles reversed, bonds broken, even turning to self-destructive acts.
In that specific example of the Unamble people in Australia, it's chilling. Their most sacred rituals reportedly became mockeries, parodies of the old ways.
And they started worshiping new, malevolent spirits that looked like the white newcomers?
Yes, while believing their own ancestral gods had just left them, abandoned them. It's such a stark illustration of that complete cultural rupture, the feeling of being spiritually adrift that the Hermetic prophecy described.
A real-world echo of the gods withdrawing.
Exactly. The old anchors are gone, replaced by something alien and terrifying.
And the comparison extends even to more sophisticated traditional societies, like in Asia or the Americas before Columbus.
Right. The source suggests that while the trauma might have looked different on the surface, maybe less immediate self-destruction, the underlying disruption was still profound.
Things like messianic movements popping up.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of it all.
Yes, or blending bits of the new religion with the old ones, but also, huge population decline from disease, losing land, losing traditions, And again, that feeling that their gods were either dead or had lost their power.
And the mention of the Maya abandoning their calendar. That's powerful.
Isn't it? The calendar was so central to their understanding of time, cosmology, everything. To abandon it signifies this profound loss of meaning, like time itself had stopped making sense, a loss of coherence.
So across different cultures, different levels of complexity, this pattern of shock, disruption, and spiritual crisis repeats when faced with a dominant external force.
It seems so. It makes the Hermetic prophecy feel less like just an ancient Egyptian concern and more like an archetype of cultural encounter almost. It speaks to something deeper in human history.
It's pretty heavy stuff. But then, amidst all this talk of decline, misunderstanding, gods leaving, the sources also give us this other image, Thoth.
Ah, yes, Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, writing, magic, often identified with Hermes.
And he's portrayed as an author of incredibly powerful texts.
Right. There's this specific mention of a book written supposedly in Thoth's own hand, and this book contains 2 spells.
Spells with serious power.
Apparently so. Reciting the first spell could let you charm the heavens, the earth, the seas, mountains, everything. Understand the birds and reptiles, like total cosmic command through language.
And the second spell.
The second one, if recited over the dead, allowed you to see the sun god Ra, accompanied by his council of gods, and even the moon god Thoth himself. Direct visionary access to the divine.
So this contrasts sharply with the anxiety about language losing its power in Greek translation, doesn't it? Here, the written word, the correctly spoken spell from a divine source, has immense world-shaping efficacy.
It's a fascinating tension, isn't it? On one hand, language is fragile, easily distorted, potentially empty. On the other, divine language, the logos captured in sacred text or utterance, holds the keys to reality itself. It shows this profound reverence for the power believed to be inherent in the right kinds of words.
It leaves us with a lot to think about regarding how these texts saw themselves and the knowledge they carried.
Definitely. And as we kind of wrap up this part of the dive, we're left with this paradox, really. These Hermetic texts claim immense wisdom, profound truths, yet they come to us often anonymous, filtered through translations, marked by these cultural battles over language.
What does that tell us about how ideas travel through time? How much gets altered or lost? How much endures?
And that whole cycle of decline and renewal in the prophecy, it really makes you think about civilizations, doesn't it? How fragile they can be, but also how belief systems, myths, narratives have this incredible power to endure and adapt even through collapse.
The resilience of belief.
Yeah. And language itself. It's both the bridge and the barrier, isn't it? It lets us connect with these ancient minds, but it also constantly reminds us of the gaps, the potential for misunderstanding, the cultural distance, how we use language, how we interpret. It's never neutral.
So maybe the final thought to leave people with is, in our own world, which is just saturated with information, endless talk, endless text, how do we even begin to tell the difference? How do we find the sounds full of energy amidst all the empty speech, as the text puts it?
That's the question, isn't it? What does it take to truly listen, to discern? And what responsibility do we have when we try to interpret and pass on knowledge, especially across vast stretches of time and cultural divides? It's certainly something to keep pondering. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you and I are venturing into a truly singular find, an astrological calendar. It's inscribed on papyrus, late 2nd century Egypt. Picture this, if you will, holding fragments, not just of a document, but, echoes of a worldview from nearly 2 millennia ago, unearthed from Oxyrhynchus.
Yeah.
It's like glimpsing a dream half recalled across centuries.
And what captivates me about this particular survival, well, wouldn't you agree, is its very fragility.
Yeah.
Its incompleteness.
Absolutely.
The lacunae, those gaps, the missing pieces, and the faded ink, they don't just present obstacles. They sort of invite us, almost compel us, really, to become interpreters, maybe even imaginative collaborators.
Yeah, piecing together a cosmic narrative with missing verses. It's as if we're stepping into a kind of mytho-academic salon where the conversation's been ongoing for millennia, and we're just catching snippets. Now, what immediately strikes you about this calendar, beyond its age, is its peculiar rhythm. I mean, forget the familiar 7-day cycle.
Right, or even the 10-day decans you see sometimes in Egypt.
Exactly. Here, the year unfolds in these 5-day measures. And each one is intimately interwoven with the 6th part of a zodiac sign. An almost fractal partitioning of time, wouldn't you say?
Indeed. And when you think that this papyrus, it's quite modest, really, 26.5 centimeters. It bears these intricate calculations and these vivid descriptions in 2 distinct hands, You've got this flowing cursive on one side, sort of hinting at daily life.
Right.
And then a more stately untrustful script on the other, mapping out the celestial influences. It gives you this profound sense of the layered realities back then.
Unsheol, like a more formal, almost handwritten capital style.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
Very deliberate.
So our mission today, should we choose to embrace it, and I think our shared curiosity compels us, is to plunge into the cosmology nestled within these fragmented columns. We want to understand how astronomy, mythology, medicine, even whispers of social commentary were all, spun together in this ancient Egyptian view of the cosmos.
So let's begin maybe by unfurling the structure itself. This division of the year into these 5-day weeks, each tethered to a sliver of a zodiacal sign. It's not just random, is it?
No, not at all. The text is quite explicit. It mentions the constellation rising just before dawn during each of these periods, a celestial marker for earthly events.
Right. It's that direct link.
Exactly. This almost visceral connection between the grand celestial ballet and, the intimate affairs down here on Earth. And the dating late 2nd century AD that's pivotal. Our sources suggest they might have been using a calendar, according to the ancients.
Interesting.
Which fascinatingly aligns the zodiac signs with different Julian calendar dates than we might expect. For instance, Pharmacy 1620 corresponded with Aquarius back then.
So it shifts. A reminder that even the fixed points aren't quite fixed over that kind of time scale.
Precisely. And what's particularly intriguing is the distinction the text itself seems to draw between the constellations, those ancient irregular star groupings.
Like the Big Dipper. Yeah.
And the signs of the zodiac, these precise, equal 30-degree slices measured from the vernal equinox.
The text acknowledges that difference. That's quite sophisticated.
It seems to. A subtle recognition, maybe, of what we now call astronomical precession.
Like the Earth's slow wobble on its axis.
Exactly. Shifting the apparent positions over huge cycles. So even if the names stayed the same, the underlying awareness seems to be there. Quite remarkable.
Okay, so let's delve deeper into the characters, the dramatis personae of this cosmic calendar.
Good way to put it. For each 5-day span, there's a presiding deity. Sometimes male, sometimes female.
Right.
And the interpretation of their influence is introduced by this phrase, minte leke. It signifies, say, like a divine announcement.
It is, isn't it? As if each period is under the guidance of a specific power, a celestial patron whose nature colors that slice of time.
And then we get these incredibly vivid tapti, these representations like statues, part human, part animal.
They're not abstract concepts at all. They're tangible, almost sculptural beings. Every detail packed with symbolic meaning.
Consider, the deity for Pharmacy 1620, this is Nebo, Lord of Wars and Reason.
Wars and Reason, interesting combo.
Right, but the visual is extraordinary. A vulture's face, a diadem, a serpent's face on the back of his head.
On the back. Wow. Hidden aspects?
Maybe. 2 wings, lion's feet, and wielding 4 golden swords.
Okay, so vulture, serpent, lion, wings, swords. It's a real composite being. Intellect and aggression, royalty, and the primal all mixed up.
Yeah, it shows how they perhaps didn't see power and intellect as totally separate. They're intertwined in this deity.
That serpent face on the back is really evocative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a subconscious element, a hidden side to this god of war and logic. And the golden swords. Conflict, sure, but also wealth, authority.
Then for Pharmacy 2630, it's fragmentary, but there's a deity linked to fire. Even with the face missing, the image is an upright statue with a young pig behind it.
A pig. Intriguing.
Swords again, and a fiery tongue and face. Paints a potent picture of raw, untamed energy, even incomplete.
Definitely.
And as we move metaphorically to Pechon 1 to 5, we get the first god of the fishes. Name's lost, sadly.
Oh, shame.
But the link to northerly winds and adversaries suggests something more. Turbulent, maybe chaotic.
Possibly. And right after him.
A female deity. Possibly Athen, or maybe connected to Sothis, Shrampa. She's described as the soul of art and the action of the sun.
The soul of art and her depiction.
Truly arresting. Imagine a statue carved from actual lapis lazuli.
Wow, that deep celestial blue, highly prized.
Seated on a throne, one serpent eye may be wisdom, hidden knowledge, and one eye of Typhon.
Typhon, the embodiment of chaos. So wisdom and chaos in one being.
Seems like it. Plus a golden face, adorned hands suggesting artistry, and a diadem. The lapis underscores her status, but those contrasting eyes, a complex figure, creative force, but maybe disruptive potential too.
Absolutely, it's a fascinating mix.
Later, another fragment, we glimpse the son of a goddess. Names partially preserved hints at a terrible speaker. He's envisioned with a lion's face, God's hair, scepter of authority, and a distinctly unsettling crocodile tail.
Crocodile tail. Earthly power, primordial waters. Again, these powerful juxtapositions.
These aren't just labels, are there? They're these potent symbolic tapestries, mythology, astronomy, all woven together.
Indeed, they're more than just descriptions. They're keys, like you said, unlocking the beliefs, the influences tied to each time period. Visual metaphors made solid, each detail speaking volumes.
And this brings us to that crucial next phrase, di lo te. It signifies therefore.
Right, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Exactly. This introduces the omens, signs, portents, the favorable and unfavorable influences tied to each deity. This is where the calendar moves from charting the heavens to, well, human destiny, interpreting daily life through this cosmic lens.
It's the practical application of their cosmology, isn't it? So, Nebo, during his 5 days in Pharmacy, he doesn't just bring war and battle abstractly.
No, it gets specific. Potential destruction of Egyptian cities, people living by stealth, but also, weirdly, singing, dancing, chanting in temples and at banquets.
So chaos and revelry side by side.
Yeah, and reversals of fortune,
Yeah.
the conqueror conquered, the conquered conquering, people living precariously on gratuities and tax collection. It's a whole tableau of a society under stress, mirroring the god's nature.
It's a fascinating window into their anxieties and social structures, absolutely.
The fragmentary fire deity of Pharmacy 2630, that period suggests people making their living by their mouths.
Like advocates, magicians.
Singers, interpreters, travelers. It's as if that fiery energy fuels eloquence, movement. The spoken word becomes life.
Interesting connection.
Yeah.
And the goddess of Pretend 1 to 5. What's her influence?
A different flavor. Her period is marked by hidden writings, foolish and unskillful people, illiterate folk alongside, well, those who know writing very differently, maybe like hieratic script.
So it points to social layers, different kinds of literacy, varying access to knowledge, all tied to that specific time window.
Yeah, and later passages get even more intimate, maybe unsettling.
How so?
Talk of men falling upon women, births where maybe only one male child survives, others die. Slaves having intercourse, their children potentially ruling over fathers and free women, while free women become childless. It's stark social inversion.
Wow. Reflecting deep anxieties about social order, maybe the fragility of their norms, projected onto the cosmos.
Seems likely, but then in contrast, you get more auspicious times.
Oh, good. It wasn't all doom and gloom.
No, periods favorable for chief priests, the flourishing of sacred scribes, promises of long life, even kings bestowing favors on adversaries.
Fostering good conduct, virtue, alliances. So it acknowledged harmony and positive forces too. That's important.
Definitely. It's a balanced system in that sense. Now, intriguingly, each 5-day period also gets its own specific ailment, a sifa.
A particular sickness for each window.
Yeah. For Nebo's time, Pharmacy's 1620, it's sickness in the intestines and bowels. High mortality rate. Echoes the destruction.
Makes sense. What about others?
Later fragments mention sickness in the shoulders, or maybe eyes, it's unclear. And this term, pasta, we don't quite know what that is.
But it's a tangible link, isn't it? Celestial influence, physical well-being, a very holistic view. Cosmic impacts on the body.
And what's really noteworthy, especially thinking about practical uses, is that medical prescriptions are included right after the description of the goddess's son.
Actual remedies. So a therapeutic dimension to this astrological knowledge.
Seems so. It hints at it anyway.
Fascinating. Now, this papyrus, amazing as it is, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? You mentioned sources connecting it to other fragments.
Exactly. There are striking similarities to a later astrological fragment found in Munich. Same basic structure. Deities, signs, events, illnesses, but arranged differently.
Which suggests a wider tradition of this specific type of astrological calendar in ancient Egypt, not just a one-off.
Precisely. And the technical language echoes writers like Ptolemy, his tetrabiblos, and Porphyry. It fits within a known scholarly astrological tradition.
And there's talk of different ranks of deities.
Yeah, superior deities, probably linked to the Egyptian decans, those star groups marking nightly hours.
Timekeepers.
And inferior deities called Krotio or Ekrano, the powerful ones or leaders. This connects it to deeper astrological framework.
Okay, and this leads to a really compelling potential link. The connexio.
Yes. Described as a concise part of the Hermetic writings, considered foundational for Hatshepsut and Paedocyres's astrological work around 100 BC.
So much earlier.
Much earlier. Our source suggests this Oxyrhynchus papyrus could be a fragment of or derived directly from this older, more comprehensive esoteric knowledge.
Which would fit with the lack of Roman references you mentioned,
Yeah.
and the frequent use of usly as kings.
Exactly. It points strongly to a Ptolemaic background for the source material, even if this copy is later. It feels like it carries echoes of an earlier Egyptian worldview, pre-Roman Empire.
And the numerous errors, the illegible bits in the archetype,
Yeah.
it just adds to that feeling of peering through a murky lens, trying to grasp fragmented wisdom passed down, maybe imperfectly.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't forget the distinctly Egyptian flavor throughout. Local references like Hermopolis Magna being mentioned.
Right, grounding it.
Even the, well, rather bizarre birth defects and conditions attributed to one deity in a fragmented section. It shows how local beliefs were woven into this broader cosmic framework. It's a unique synthesis. Hellenistic astrology meets specific Egyptian understanding.
So as we draw this deep dive toward a close, what are the key threads we've pulled together?
Well, I think this calendar gives us an extraordinary, really intimate glimpse into that whole intricate tapestry of life in late 2nd century Egypt.
It unveils a world where the celestial and the terrestrial weren't separate boxes at all. They were deeply intertwined.
Yeah, the movements of stars, constellations,
Yeah.
they were believed to have a direct, tangible impact on everything. Politics, personal health, well-being.
It's a powerful testament to that ancient human ability to synthesize, isn't it? Weaving together astronomy, mythology, early medicine, social commentary.
Into a coherent, if complex, system for understanding the world. You see the meticulous scholar charting the heavens side by side with the imaginative storyteller crafting these vivid divine portraits. It's a fusion of the empirical and the poetic.
It really is that mytho-academic salon you mentioned, isn't it? Where precise astronomical data sits alongside fantastical hybrid deities, and where society's anxieties and hopes are reflected in the cosmic order. And it leaves us, I think you and I, with a profound sort of lingering question. How might encountering these fundamentally different systems of knowledge, where causality, interconnectedness are understood so expansively, perhaps even in ways alien to us, how might that challenge our own, often more compartmentalized contemporary view of the world?
What lost ways of interpreting reality might these fragments hint at?
Exactly. And what enduring value, maybe even a renewed sense of wonder, might they hold for us today as we navigate our own complex times? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you and I are venturing into, a fascinatingly obscure corner of the ancient world.
Ooh, which corner is that?
The whispered histories, you might say, held within what the Greeks called hierologoi and hierebibloi.
The marginal sacred texts and books, right? These are kind of the hidden threads, aren't they, in that huge tapestry of ancient belief?
Exactly. Think of them like that. Because while we often focus on the big stuff, the temples, the public rituals carved in stone,
The laws about piety, all of that, it looms large in how we usually picture it.
it does. But our focus today, it's drawn more to these more intimate, often sort of veiled expressions of faith that were captured in writing.
It's a curious paradox, isn't it? Because written religious texts, they definitely circulated, we know that. But the idea of a fixed sacred book, with the kind of central authority we see later, well, that seems to have held a different, maybe less dominant place in Greece, compared to Rome, certainly, or later religions of the book.
Right. It's a different emphasis.
Yeah.
We actually have a lot of surviving religious documents from Greece, don't we?
We do. Things like sacred calendars, marking out the year's rituals. Oracles, of course.
Occult regulations, even personal dedications people inscribed on offerings, all on different kinds of materials.
Stone, metal, papyrus.
Yeah.
Yeah. But our real quest today lies more with the ones that have, largely vanished.
The lost echoes, the deliberately unspoken things, or the carefully hidden ones.
Exactly. These specific hieroi logoi and hierae bibloi, it's almost like trying to trace the outline of a lost continent from just a few scattered fragments.
Ooh, I like that image.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate this shadowy terrain?
Well, I think it helps to use 3 interconnected pairs of concepts, kind of like guiding stars.
Okay, what are they?
First, the subtle difference between sacred texts and sacred books. Second, the dance between oral and written tradition. And third, that constant tension between secrecy and revelation. I think these lenses will help sharpen our view as we try to figure out what these fleeting references really mean.
Sounds good. Let's start with that first pair then. Texts versus books. How are we defining those?
Well, when we say text, we're talking quite broadly, right? Verbal communication, Could be spoken, could be written.
Like a prayer someone says, or an inscription on a temple wall.
Exactly. But a book, a biblos, that's a bit more specific. An organized written text, probably on papyrus or maybe parchment, a roll, or later, a codex.
So the key point here, as I see it, is that texts, especially spoken ones, were just everywhere in Greek religion. More fundamental than books.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Far more pervasive. Texts, particularly spoken ones, were like the lifeblood. Think of the hymns sung in sanctuaries, the myths told and retold.
The oracles shaping decisions.
Right. Books needing materials and a conscious effort to organize, that feels like a more deliberate step, maybe aimed at preservation, codification.
Which brings us to an early, really interesting example. Hippolytos in Euripides' play.
Ah, yes. Hippolytus. So austere, so pure.
And in the play, Theseus doesn't just condemn his son's lifestyle, does he? He specifically attacks him for honoring many vaporous screeds.
Those Orphic writings, yes. And following that special diet, it immediately marks him out.
It paints him as religiously different, an outlier.
And what's so striking is that this seems to be the earliest clear point in Greek records where religious writings are tied directly to someone's religious identity.
And in his case, it's used to marginalize him, almost make him seem heretical in that context.
Precisely. These grammata, these written words, whatever they contain, they set him apart. Define him religiously to others. It's a key early link. Specific texts, specific identity, and here, marginality.
And grammata itself is a bit ambiguous, isn't it? It just means written word, basically.
It does, but connecting it with Orpheus immediately pulls us into that world of esoteric knowledge, hidden beliefs under the surface of mainstream religion.
There's that reference in the Dravini Papyrus too, though it's debated, I know, about a hieros logos attributed to Orpheus.
Right, the restoration of that key phrase is definitely still debated among scholars. It's tantalizing, though.
But even without that specific papyrus link, the general feeling is that by the 5th century BCE, Orpheus was associated with hieroi logoi, probably in hexameter verse.
The evidence points strongly that way, yes. And what's really telling is that the followers of Orpheus, with their reliance on these arcane books and special diets, they were clearly seen as being on the edges of normal Greek religion.
Their piety was a deviation.
Definitely. It underscores that for most Greeks, religious life was more about the dramana, the things done, the rituals enacted.
Then the legomena, the things said, the doctrine.
Exactly. And these hieroi logoi, it seems they were a very specific, often deliberately obscure kind of legomena.
Not your everyday prayers or hymns. They had a different weight, maybe a sense of privileged, hidden wisdom.
That seems right. Their exclusivity, maybe the context initiation versus public ritual, that was key.
Which leads us nicely into that second pair, orality versus the written versions.
Yes, because even when sacred knowledge was written down, the power of the spoken word often remained crucial. How it was transmitted, how it was received.
And Aristophanes' Birds gives us a brilliant, funny example of this, right? With the oracle monger.
Oh, the Chrysmologos. Yes, that scene is fantastic. He comes in all full of himself.
The divinely sanctioned interpreter.
Tries to stop Paesotire's sacrifice for his new city by reading prophecies he says are from the seer Bacchus. Solemnly unrolls his papyrus, his biblion.
But Paesotires isn't having it. He whips out his own oracle, supposedly from Apollo, that just happens to support exactly what he wants to do.
And the comedy there just shines a light on so many things about sacred writings back then.
Like what, specifically?
Well, first it shows that written collections of traditional oracles definitely existed and circulated.
Okay.
Second, you had these traveling chrysmologoi, these oracle experts, basically competing for influence. And third, it strongly suggests the authenticity of these things was, well, often pretty dubious. Lots of room for forgery, right? Herodotus actually gives historical accounts that sound very similar, people peddling or manipulating oracles.
It's amazing how comedy reveals that.
Yeah.
And think about this setting, he interrupts a sacrifice.
Right. It connects the sacred text, the oral performance of reading it, and the ritual act itself. The oracle being quoted even sort of mirrors and parodies the sacrifice that's happening.
So what key things does that scene highlight for you about these writings?
For me, firstly, the performance aspect. Even reading from a scroll, the Chrysmologos is performing a role, trying to embody that traditional voice.
Makes sense.
Secondly, the whole competition for religious authority. Both of them are trying to use sacred words to back up their own agendas.
Right.
And finally, maybe the instability of written texts in a culture that was still largely oral. How easily Paesotiros produces a counter-oracle shows how texts could be manipulated and how hard it was to prove authenticity.
Absolutely. And then there's the question of divine authority itself.
Yeah, the Cosmologos cites Bacchus, a human seer, albeit legendary.
But Pisotaros claims Apollo himself, which is bolder.
And in Aristophanes' Knights, that rivalry is even clearer. You have competing oracle collections, both claiming they come from Apollo.
So the perceived power of any sacred text really depended on who people believed the divine source was and who they trusted as the interpreter.
Exactly. And the oral nature of oracles just persists, doesn't it? Even when read from a scroll, the Cosmologos is revoicing a divine utterance, supposedly.
Pisotaros even says he wrote down Apollo's oracle himself. And they keep telling each other, take the book.
Lab to Biblion, yes. Take it, check it. Even though we, the audience, know it's probably all made up.
It highlights that tension perfectly. Relying on writing for proof, but still facing the risk of forgery and the power of just saying it out loud. Herodotus tells stories about oracles being deliberately twisted or faked for political reasons, too.
That phrase, lam de Biblion, take the book, is so telling. Now, Biblion often gets translated as book, but it could just mean a sheet of papyrus with writing, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Could be a single sheet, could be part of a roll. We don't know for sure in that scene.
But it definitely points towards compiling sacred texts in writing, like these oracle collections. Maybe the beginnings of what we could call a sacred book, a Hieron Biblion.
And we know other ancient sacred books were essentially collections, right?
Absolutely. Think of the Sibylline books in Rome, those legendary state-controlled oracles consulted in emergencies. They're lost now, of course.
But we have later examples that survive.
Right, like the magical papyri full of spells, or the New Testament Gospels and letters, the Gnostic texts from Nag Hammadi,
the Corpus Hermeticum, the Cologne Mani Codex.
All collections bringing together different sacred writings. It shows that impulse to gather and codify.
Which takes us to our third theme, secrecy and revelation. This feels like the most mysterious part.
It often is. How did that tension wanting to guard sacred knowledge versus needing to reveal some of it shape things?
Where do we see that playing out?
Well, Demosthenes gives us a really sharp glimpse. He's attacking his rival, Aeschines.
Never holds back, Demosthenes.
No. And he describes Aeschines taking part in a private mystery cult for Sabazios. And he says, rather scornfully, that Aeschines would read from the books during the secret initiation rites.
That feels really significant. It's the earliest Athenian reference we have to written texts actually being used in a specific ritual performance, isn't it?
It seems to be, yes. These books, probably papyrus rolls, likely had the ritual instructions. Or maybe, as our source suggests, even a hieros logos to be recited at the climax of the initiation.
You really see the tension there, secrecy, but also revelation within the rite.
Exactly. It shows that interplay. The spoken word, the written text guiding it, and the transformative power they believed was in the ritual proclamation. I escaped from evil, I found the better.
Even those words spoken aloud might have been written down in the rolls.
Very likely. And notice again the theme of marginalization. Demosthenes uses Aeschines' involvement with these esoteric books in a private, somewhat foreign cult to attack him.
Just like Hippolytos and his Orphic writings. They're portrayed as outside the mainstream religious practice.
Precisely. In pre-Hellenistic Greece, these kinds of cult books seem to have stayed on the edges. They weren't central to the state religion.
Okay, so now the focus shifts a bit to Egypt.
Yes, because the Greeks had this perception of Egypt as, well, the ancient land of wisdom.
Right. Full of sacred tales, hierai logoi, and sacred books, hierai biblioi.
Written in those mysterious sacred letters, hierai grammata hieroglyphs, and kept safe in sacred libraries.
It was like Egypt held the master key to ancient religion, all written down.
Almost like a living archive of sacred knowledge, a testament to writing's power in divine matters. We even have that inscription from Andros,
where Isis herself says she inscribed a fearsome hieros logos for the initiates.
Exactly, reinforcing that link. Divine authority, written texts, and the secret world of mystery cults.
And this all leads up to that Ptolemaic decree, right?
Yeah.
From Egypt.
Yes, the royal decree, very likely from Ptolemy V of Philopator. It's a fascinating piece of evidence.
What did it demand?
It required all Dionysiac initiates across the kingdom to register in Alexandria. They had to declare their ritual lineage, who initiated them.
And the crucial part.
They had to submit a sealed hieros logos with their name on it.
Wow. Sealed. What do scholars think is going on there?
Well, there's a lot of debate. Was it the state trying to control religion, maybe create an official Dionysiac cult?
Or suppress private groups that might be subversive?
Or maybe royal patronage,
Yeah.
trying to standardize these popular groups. Or maybe just, a way to tax them.
The motivation isn't clear.
Not definitively. And a lot hinges on how we interpret Hyros logos in that context.
Okay, so what were these submitted texts thought to be?
Clearly, they were owned by religious experts, probably passed down, they were written, and they were sealed. Scholars have suggested they could be sacred books with myths or ritual tales, maybe detailed liturgies.
Or even personal records of teachings, archives of the cult.
All plausible interpretations. What strikes me is the duality, again, Hyros logos, connected to oral things like tales or teachings, but also submitted as a fixed, sealed, written copy.
And the secrecy seems absolutely key here.
Paramount. Walter Burkert's definition is apt. A Hyros logos is something not to be disclosed to the uninitiated.
So these texts Ptolemy wanted, their contents, even what they look like, are mostly a mystery to us.
And that obscurity was probably essential to their sacred status for the initiates themselves.
The sealing, too, that suggests protecting ownership, authenticity, keeping it from profane eyes.
All of the above, most likely. It even echoes later ideas, like the sealed scroll in the Book of Revelation. The mystery wasn't a flaw, it was part of the power.
It's interesting that tension between ancient authors often being reluctant to reveal these things, and modern scholars sometimes being eager to label any esoteric text Hyros logos.
Yes, Burkert's warning about books actually titled Hyroi Logoi, being likely a priori apocryphal, is important. A bit suspicious if it announces itself too loudly.
Good point. So after Herodotus, the qualities people associated with Hyroi Logoi were usually divine origin, secrecy, and some kind of mysticism.
Generally, yes,
Yeah.
which added to their exclusive feel. And even when written, there was often still that oral aspect, maybe only recited within the group, reinforcing the silence around them.
It's a paradox, isn't it? Writing them down risks the secrecy, but the ones claiming to be ancient Hyroi Logoi with named authors are usually fakes. Pseudepigrapha.
Exactly. And geographically, there seems to be a difference. In mainland Greece, they mostly stayed unwritten, it seems.
But in Egypt, especially Alexandria,
We see more of a trend towards writing them down, collecting them, maybe turning them into Hierai Bibloi within the Dionysus cult, perhaps mixing with Osiris traditions.
which is quite different from Judaism and Christianity.
Very different. For them, the revealed word of God was central, authoritative, and meant to be accessible fundamentally.
And even when Jewish or Christian writers use terms like Hyros logos or hierogrammata,
They meant something different by them, often specific parts of their own scriptures, like the Torah. Not quite the same usage as their pagan contemporaries. It shows how language shifts.
so to bring all these threads together, Pausanias is key, you mentioned.
Immensely valuable. That traveler in the Roman era, exploring Greece's religious sites, his reluctance to discuss the secret parts of cults, the operetta, tells us a lot.
He does sometimes mention Hyroi logo for oral traditions explaining weird things, right?
Yeah.
Like why a statue was missing or the bean taboo at Phenios.
Yes, but he doesn't spill the beans, so to speak. He doesn't reveal the content of the logos.
But he does describe secret texts, grammata, at Phenios, kept inside the Patroma, those big stones.
Right, and read aloud to initiates during the greater mysteries, probably in darkness.
And these texts likely contain ritual instructions, maybe the explanation for the bean taboo itself.
Seems very likely. Another clear case of an esoteric text, read from what we could call a sacred book in a specific ritual, mixing secrecy, text, and performance.
Then there's that weird text at Lerna he knew about, for the mysteries of Dionysus and Demeter.
The one on the heart-shaped piece of copper, yeah. Verse and prose, only for initiates.
And it sounds a bit like those gold Orphic tablets found elsewhere, the ones with messages about achieving a blessed afterlife.
There's definitely a resonance there. Pausanias consistently differentiates between normal logoi public stories and these exclusive Hieroi logo, where being marginal and secret is the whole point.
But the best case study for how a sacred text might evolve is the Andania story.
It really is. It spans centuries. Starts with an oracle to Aristomenes, him burying something secret.
Then much later, Epidales finds it again, during Messenian independence, inscribed on tin.
And then the priestly families transcribe it into multiple bibloi, multiple books, to preserve it.
That story just perfectly shows the whole process, doesn't it? Oracle to writing, the link to marginal groups, the Messenians regaining independence, the relationship between the sacred idea and the physical books.
And that tension again. needing secrecy, but also needing written copies to make sure it survives accurately.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left really appreciating how elusive these hieroi logoi and hierai bibloi are.
They really occupied a liminal space, didn't they? Often in the shadows, defined by the secrecy around them and the power of the spoken word, even when written.
We've looked at the subtle lines between texts and books, how speaking and writing work together for sacred knowledge.
And how secrecy was just this constant defining theme for these special, often peripheral religious discourses.
It leaves me thinking, well, it leaves us with a final question to ponder, perhaps.
Come on.
Given how powerful the aura of mystery was around these things, how restricted the access, could their very absence from public view, their silence, have shaped the religious imagination of ancient Greece?
Shaped it maybe even more profoundly than the obvious inscriptions and public rituals. That's an intriguing thought.
What kind of sacred knowledge, actually thrives best in that in-between space, between being spoken and being written down, between being revealed just enough and being kept carefully hidden? Welcome. You've joined us for a deep dive where we really get into the details of source materials, aiming to give you those key insights without you needing to become, a full-time researcher.
Exactly. Think of it as your focused exploration.
And today, we're exploring something quite special, I think.
Indeed. We are immersing ourselves in the ancient Egyptian Book of Thoth. Now, this isn't some text that just magically appeared yesterday. It's a religious text, mainly from the later periods, Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt, so roughly 330 BC to maybe 400 AD, that really came into sharper focus for scholars around 2005.
2005. That feels quite recent for an ancient text.
It does, relatively speaking. And our chat today is based heavily on the, let's say, more accessible edition put together by Richard Jasnow and Carl Theodor Zalzig. They did the foundational scholarly work.
Okay, so a new ancient text highlighted in the 21st century. That definitely piques my interest. What's the core of this Book of Thoth, and what are we trying to unpack today?
Well, our mission, if you will, is to explore what this text is. What's its nature? We need to talk about the challenges, because understanding something this old, this culturally distant, is never simple. But also, what amazing glimpses does it give us into ancient Egyptian thought, especially around things like scribal knowledge.
Initiation.
And there's this fascinating dialogue format within it, a master and a disciple. It feels like there are layers of symbolism just waiting.
A master and disciple.
Yeah.
Yeah, that immediately brings to light ancient wisdom, transmission of knowledge. So you mentioned 2005. Why was it sort of under the radar before then? What made it significant when Jasnow and Zalzig published?
Well, it's not that no one knew about any fragments. Bits and pieces had been noticed. But Jasnow and Zalzig really pulled it together, presented it as this coherent work, the Book of Thoth. And they saw its importance. They called it a surviving monument of ancient Egyptian thought. So its significance isn't just that it felt new to many, but its potential to really adjust our understanding of religion and intellectual life in late Egypt.
But you also flagged the difficulties. What makes it so complex to get a handle on?
Right. And this gets to the heart of working with ancient texts, doesn't it? The sheer time gap creates hurdles. Deciphering the script, translating the language, and then the biggest step, interpretation.
Interpretation, yeah.
The authors themselves are very clear. Almost every line could have multiple readings. They talk about its multi-leveled character.
Multi-level.
Meaning it's packed with symbols, theology, philosophy, all compressed, in that typical Egyptian way. So hitting on one single precise translation, often impossible.
Okay.
You kind of have to accept a certain amount of ambiguity. It's part of the deal when you study this stuff.
Not light reading then. Definitely not. So let's talk about the physical text. What are these writings? Where do they come from? And what script are we talking about?
Good question. It's not like one big scroll they found intact. It's more like a puzzle pieced together from lots of papyrus fragments scattered across museums worldwide.
Fragments.
Yeah, mostly dating to that Ptolemaic and Roman window. And the main script is Demotic.
Demotic.
It's a cursive script, became popular around 700 BC. Initially, it was for everyday stuff, letters, accounts, legal documents.
Right.
Herodotus, the Greek historian, actually called it Demotica, script of the people. That's where our name comes from.
Interesting.
But what's really interesting is that by maybe 400 BC, scribes started using Demotic for literary works, even religious texts, like this Book of Thoth.
So the everyday script got promoted, in a sense, to handle sacred ideas.
Yeah.
But didn't you mention another script being used sometimes?
I did, yes. Some fragments use hieratic,
Hieratic.
which is an older cursive script traditionally used for more formal religious and literary texts throughout much of Egyptian history. Finding hieratic in parts of the Book of Thoth, like on a key papyrus in the Louvre, it suggests this text was considered really important. Maybe they were deliberately trying to give it an air of ancient authority.
Okay, demotic. This cursive script evolving from hieroglyphs. Sounds like that alone would present some real challenges for decipherment. What kind of hurdles did the scholars face with the script itself?
Oh, definitely. Demotic is very fluid. Signs often run together, sort of like our handwriting.
Right.
And while it comes from hieroglyphs, figuring out the original picture form isn't always easy, or even the main goal for demotic specialists.
They don't try to translate it back in their heads.
Not usually, no. They treat demotic as its own system. The authors give an example. You can sort of still see the horned viper hieroglyph in its demotic version, but the sign for a newborn hartebeest. Much more abstract, almost unrecognizable.
Fascinating. So what else makes demotic tricky?
Well, the writing system itself, it's right to left like other Egyptian scripts, and it uses a mix of signs. You have sound signs basically representing consonants, and then these silent sense signs, which we call determinatives.
Determinatives.
Yeah, they don't represent a sound, but they tell you the general category of the word. Like, a little seated man sign might mean the word relates to speaking or eating. Walking legs mean motion.
So they guide the meaning.
Exactly. And they're super important because remember, Egyptian writing usually just gives you the consonants, no vowels.
Right, so lots of words could look the same.
Precisely. The consonants P and R could be seed or to go out, but a determinative showing little round things tells you it's seed, while the walking legs tell you it's to go out.
Got it.
Plus, you have the challenge of different scribes having different handwriting, just like today.
Of course.
But sometimes, a scribe's unique way of writing a sign can actually help. Like, the scribe of a big Berlin papyrus wrote the word jed, meaning to say, with this unusual horizontal top stroke. That quirk helps link fragments together.
It's like handwriting analysis for ancient texts. And the mixing of demotic and hieratic you mentioned.
Yeah, finding both on the same papyrus, like that Louvre piece. It's unusual. It doesn't necessarily make it harder to read for an expert, but it definitely signals something special about the text, maybe trying to invoke that older sacred tradition.
And you mentioned transliteration, but the book uses English spellings.
Right. Egyptologists have a system, transliteration, using Roman letters for Egyptian sounds. But for this edition, aiming for wider reach, Jasno and Zauzix just spelled words out, like writing jed instead of, the technical symbols, makes it more accessible.
That makes sense. Okay, let's go back to the ambiguity. You said some signs can mean multiple things. How big a problem is that?
It's a huge challenge, really central. A single demotic squiggle could be a sound or a determinative or even a number, depending entirely on the context.
Wow.
So if the papyrus is damaged right there, or you don't have other similar text to compare, it's easy to misread or just miss other possibilities.
So mistakes can happen.
Oh, definitely. The authors even give an example where they first read a group of signs as he's, meaning to praise. But then another scholar, Joachim Quack, argued convincingly it should be it, to reckon, based on what was around it. And the key thing is, the sign itself could reasonably be read either way. It takes careful analysis of the context.
So it's ongoing detective work, even among experts.
Absolutely. And sometimes even the ancient scribes made mistakes. They might mix up signs that looked similar, like writing the sign for lion when they meant to reckon.
Really?
Yeah, if the main signs look alike, maybe only the determinative is different. You can see how a slip could happen. It shows even native users weren't immune to the script's complexities.
That's actually kind of comforting in a way.
It is, and language changes, right? Words go in and out of fashion. They mentioned puzzling over a word dizes, then realizing it was just a later demotic spelling jesm for an older word dizim, both meaning dog.
Huh. Like slang evolving.
Exactly. Or sometimes scribes used unorthographic spellings, writing a rare word, using the signs for a common word that sounded similar, even if the meaning was totally different, like writing sip to inspect, using the signs for sep, remainder.
Man, that adds layers of complexity.
It really does. Linguistic drift, creative spellings.
Yeah.
It all makes decipherment a dynamic process.
Okay, so let's shift gears slightly. How did this text come back into the spotlight in modern times? Who kicked off the recent study?
The main credit for the modern focus really goes to Carl Theodor Zauzix. Back in the 1960s, he did major work on a key Berlin papyrus, known as B02.
E02.
That was sort of the anchor manuscript that drew serious attention. As more fragments surfaced, the editors created a labeling system, B for Berlin, C for Copenhagen, L for Louvre, etc., to keep track.
Makes sense.
But yeah, piecing it together is tough. Fragments are small, handwriting can be similar. Figuring out what belongs with what is a real puzzle.
And where were these fragments actually found?
The main find spots are two towns in the Fayum region, that oasis area southwest of Cairo, Daim, which was called Sanopaionessos back then, and Tiptinus.
Okay.
And the papyri themselves mostly date from the 1st century BC through the 2nd century AD, Roman period Egypt, basically.
So, like, digging through archives, trying to reconstruct this ancient voice. Let's get into that voice now, the content. You mentioned the master and disciple dialogue. Tell us more about them and the book's structure.
Right. The book isn't really a linear story. It's mostly structured around this back and forth between the master and the disciple, questions and answers driving it forward.
Who are they thought to be?
The master is often called Hezeret, which could mean the one of Hezeret, Thoth's sacred place, or maybe Hezrek, the one who praises knowledge. The authors think it's quite likely the master is Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, or maybe a very high priest acting in that role, possibly even channeling Imhotep, the deified architect sage.
And the disciple.
He's called Merek, the one who loves knowledge or wishes to learn. His big goal is to get into the House of Life.
The House of Life. That sounds important.
Hugely important. It was the main center for priestly scholarship in a temple, the intellectual heart.
Okay.
And while the text has a sort of overall flow, sometimes it feels, like I said, almost encyclopedic, jumping between topics, scribal stuff, theology, scholarly lists in ways that aren't always obvious to us now.
An encyclopedia revealed through conversation. That's a neat idea.
Yeah.
And this House of Life, what role does it play? You mentioned initiation.
Exactly. Scholars like Joachim Quack really emphasize seeing the Book of Thoth as an initiation text. The House of Life is the setting, the goal, the symbol. It's everything.
So how does the initiation progress? Is there a clear path?
Not like chapters in a modern book, but you can see a thematic arc. It starts with introducing the characters, the scene, then it gets into what scribal knowledge is, hieroglyphs, sacred texts, the House of Life itself. The disciple talks about what he wants to do there. Then there's this intense dialogue about scribal training, even a hymn to Imhotep linking to past wisdom, discussions about how you enter the House of Life symbolically, how hieroglyphs were created.
Symbolically.
Right. The disciple seems to undergo transformations, asks questions about the underworld, sees the House of Life as this symbolic space full of beings. He aims for this goal called support of life. There are descriptions of sacred creatures, questions about animals, and objects may be coded. Talk about hieroglyphs again.
And that vulture list you mentioned.
Yes, that comes near the end. This amazing list linking vultures and their nests to all 42 nomes, or regions, of Egypt. And likely the 42 sacred books kept in the House of Life.
Wow, that's specific.
It really is. And then some concluding lines, often looping back to knowledge and initiation.
So this House of Life, is it a real building or more like a metaphorical space in the text?
That's a great question. It seems to be both. A lot of the action feels grounded in the physical House of Life, maybe during rituals, but the Egyptians saw deep symbolism in their temples. The House of Life becomes a microcosm, reflecting the cosmos, the divine world, even the underworld. The language gets very metaphorical.
How so?
Well, the whole process of learning to be a scribe, mastering the knowledge, it's presented as being like the journey of the dead person trying to achieve rebirth and eternal life.
Thus learning is like a spiritual journey towards immortality.
In a way, yes. The intellectual and the spiritual are completely intertwined. Getting knowledge is a path to transformation.
That's profound. What are some of the recurring symbols or themes that really jump out from this master-disciple talk?
Well, right at the start, the instruction is to go learn from a son of Wenyema, probably Thoth or Imhotep again, setting up that wisdom lineage. Then there's the ritual of entering into the Chamber of Darkness. That phrase, Chamber of Darkness, is used repeatedly for the House of Life itself. Very evocative of secret knowledge, initiation. You're told to heed the lords of offerings, gods connected to Thoth. The master insists the teachings are as vital as mother's milk, using this image of a nurse. It stresses how fundamental this knowledge is.
The nurse image. Powerful.
And the creative power of writing comes through vividly. Metaphors like ears of grain of gold, talk of the Lord of Hermopolis, Thoth, images of netting, hunting.
Hunting. How does that relate?
It seems to symbolize capturing or mastering the hieroglyphs, the sacred animals, controlling knowledge itself through writing and reading. The disciple is eager to explain the hieroglyphic signs of Isin. Isin is another name for Thoth.
So the tools of writing must have been symbolic too. Pens, papyrus.
Absolutely. There's a whole chapter of the scribal equipment. It mentions the sons of Wanyema, maybe the scribal priests, the signs of Isin, papyrus rolls, teaching, the goddess Seshat.
Seshat, she's the goddess of writing, right?
Exactly. The library is a treasury. Knowledge is kept in secret boxes. The scribe is a craftsman. The ideal scribe, the master says, is like a blessed spirit seeking knowledge in the secret chambers of the Lord of Heidnu.
Heidnu.
Apparently, Heidnu is a word for the scribal brush. So writing itself links you to the sacred, eternal realm.
Wow. And what does the disciple hope to achieve through this?
He wants to join the sun god Re's boat, learn the stars, gain control over the sacred books, maybe even perform the opening of the mouth ceremony on the texts themselves to activate them.
Opening the mouth, like they did for statues and mummies.
Yeah.
Applied to books.
Seems like it, yes. He wants to be a lector priest, a keriheb, skilled in reading and interpreting the holy texts.
So aiming for the absolute peak of scribal and priestly power.
That's the feeling. Then the master tells stories of creation Thoth, or maybe the sun god creating things. There's a weird bit about 10 and 9 vultures. Its meaning is lost on us, really. But also creating script, understanding the language of sacred animals again, probably hieroglyphs.
Okay. And entering the house of life.
Described with images of windows, locks, gates. Guarded by sacred animals, jackals, ibises, thoths, creatures, the disciple has to offer the right gift, which seems to be proper knowledge and behavior.
Like passing a test.
Exactly. There's this witty exchange about a bone of a spirit and the heart-mind of a donkey. It sounds like a clever riddle to prove his worth.
Okay.
The master warns him not to enter unprepared, calls the place a divine shrine, the land of the divine word. The disciple takes on guises, a mummy, a snake. He's quizzed about Thoth, about funerary texts, and those images of fishing and netting come back, happening inside the house of life, linking scribal work to the sacred journey again.
The symbolism is just relentless, isn't it? Every detail seems packed.
It really is. The disciple shows he knows esoteric things, like the arms of Shu from Underworld books. He enters the Ferry of the Snake, which is defined as the container of the hieroglyphic sign.
Container of the sign.
Yeah, maybe meaning a papyrus roll or the act of writing. Possibly Re's boat, too. He gets symbolic tools from sacred animals like a divine ordination. There's a gate of green stone, which equals the chamber of darkness, and also the hall of the two truths from the Book of the Dead judgment scene. It's associated with 42 bare soul spirits, often shown as vultures, and with Seshat, writing personified.
42 that connects to the vulture list again.
Seems very likely. Then the master quizzes him on animals and objects, probably testing his grasp of hieroglyphs as symbols. And the disciple boasts about knowing myths, like Horus defeating enemies, showing his theological grounding.
It all seems to build towards this vulture list. What makes it such a capstone?
It really is presented as a kind of tour de force, linking each of the 42 vultures plus their babies to one of the 42 gnomes of Egypt.
The administrative districts.
Right, and almost certainly connecting them to the 42 sacred books supposedly held in the House of Lice library. It's like a complete symbolic map of Egypt, geographically and intellectually.
Wow.
It showcases Thoth's title, He Who Understands the Two Lands, his mastery over all of Egypt. By reciting and understanding this list, the disciple proves he has that comprehensive grasp. He's ready.
A demonstration of total mastery. So, stepping back, what's the big picture takeaway from the Book of Thoth? What does it tell us about intellectual life back then?
I think it shows us just how deeply interconnected everything was. Practical scribal skills, religious belief, mythology, the afterlife journey. It's all one fabric.
Right.
The pursuit of knowledge in the House of Life wasn't just academic, it was a sacred, transformative quest. It highlights how writing itself was seen as powerful, maybe even magical, and the scribe priest was crucial for maintaining cosmic order and cultural memory.
And that subtitle connecting it to the classical Hermetica. Tell me about that connection again.
Ah, yes, an Egyptian pendant to the classical Hermetica. The Hermetica are those Greek and Latin texts from Roman times, philosophical and mystical dialogues featuring Hermes, the Greek Thoth.
Thoth Hermes, right?
And figures like Asclepius who might connect to Imhotep. Like the Book of Thoth, they use dialogue to explore deep knowledge.
So, similar style.
Similar style, similar key figures, Thoth Hermes. While we might not find direct quotes back and forth yet, The authors felt the structural and thematic links were strong enough to suggest real intellectual currents flowing between Egyptian traditions and Hellenistic thought.
Interesting.
They wanted scholars of Hermeticism to realize there was this contemporary Egyptian counterpart, offering a fuller picture of the era's intellectual ferment.
It really feels like we've only skimmed the surface here. This text sounds incredibly dense, offering this unique view where writing is almost a sacred technology, isn't it? A key to both this world and the next.
Absolutely. It's a precious window into that scribal culture, the religious mindset, this intense pursuit of understanding within the house of life. So many layers still to unpack.
Considering this amazing blend in the Book of Thoth, the very practical side of scribal work fused with these deep mythological meanings, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might they have actually perceived the act of writing itself? Was it seen as fundamentally sacred, a practice that could actually transform you, shape your path, not just in life, but into eternity?
And maybe, what can that ancient view tell us today, as we still wrestle with the power we give to texts, to learning, and to those moments of passage, of initiation, in our own lives and cultures?
Welcome back, fellow explorers of the arcane and the erudite. Today, let's imagine we're stepping through a kind of shimmering portal. Not into a dusky old archive, though, but maybe into a hidden salon of antiquity.
I like that image. A salon.
Our focus is this body of work, really shrouded in mystery, the Book of Thoth. Think of it less as a book, maybe, and more as a collection of whispers, fragmented echoes from a sophisticated intellectual world. Quite unlike anything else we know from ancient Egypt, really.
Indeed. And the materials we're looking at, these remnants from Berlin, Copenhagen, Florence, the Louvre, Vienna, Yale, the British Museum, the Austrian National Library, it represents a huge ongoing effort, a kind of scholarly curation piecing this intricate puzzle together over generations.
And what a puzzle. I mean, what immediately struck me was its distinct flavor. It's not like the usual religious texts or, funerary guides. The Book of Thoth seems to inhabit its own sort of unique intellectual space.
That's a great way to put it. Like, we've stumbled on the private notes of some ancient philosophical circle.
Exactly. We're sort of venturing into a realm where the usual maps of Egyptian thought, they only give vague outlines, don't they?
They really do. And right at the heart of it, we find this figure, Mr.
Yes.
Translated usually as the one who loves knowledge, or maybe he who wishes to learn.
Okay.
But what's really resonant, I think, is the suggested connection to the Greek term philosophies.
Philosophies, really?
Yes, and apparently this connection is, unique. You don't seem to find it elsewhere in the vast corpus of Egyptian writings.
Wow. That's quite something. A potential link between these two great intellectual traditions, centuries before we usually think they properly met.
It is tantalizing, isn't it?
Was it like a deliberate borrowing, ancient intellectual diplomacy, or just two cultures thinking along similar lines?
It's hard to be certain. A fascinating convergence, though, whatever the cause.
And this Mr. figure, he's not just sitting back reading scrolls, is he?
No, not at all. He's described as actively engaging with the divine, seeking initiation, into Thoth's wisdom, even taking part in cosmic struggles.
So the scholar as action hero, almost, the intellect in motion.
Sort of. It points to this aspiration that's more than just collecting facts. It's a desire to participate in existence itself, to understand and maybe even influence the cosmic order.
Okay, so we're faced with these fragments, these shards of ancient thinking. What are the sort of practical challenges in just trying to understand such a scattered collection?
Well, the fragmentation is obviously a huge hurdle, no question.
Right.
But paradoxically, the sheer number of papyri fragments related to the Book of Thoth is actually quite high compared to many other Egyptian texts.
Oh, interesting.
So even though they're broken, having so many witnesses lets scholars trace the manuscript tradition, at least to some extent. You can't draw a neat family tree, a stemma,
Like a genealogy for the texts.
Exactly, that seems elusive. But you can start to map relationships between different sections and versions.
So it's like trying to reconstruct not just one broken vase, but maybe several slightly different versions of the same vase, all smashed and mixed up.
That's a very good analogy, yes. And scholars use visual aids. You see them in plates 66 and 67 in the source material to try and chart these connections between the bigger chunks and the floating fragments.
Okay.
And we also find textual variations. Some are pretty significant, like between the Berlin Papyrus B02 and the Louvre one, L01. Others are more minor.
And these variations, they're just mistakes ancient typos? Or could they actually show us different interpretations, maybe different schools of thought about the Book of Thoth itself?
That's the million-dollar question, really, and it's something scholars are still debating. The footnotes in our sources mention the complexities here. Egyptian manuscript traditions. Well, they allowed for a certain amount of what you might call scribal license.
Ah, okay. Not just copying.
Not just rote copying, interpretations, maybe expansions, deliberate adaptations even over time. So these variants could reflect the text as a living thing, how it was received, maybe reimagined in different places or times.
So, not a fixed monument, but more like a flowing river of ideas, changing subtly with each scribe. Fascinating. Okay, beyond the physical challenge of piecing it together, what are the main themes? What core ideas keep coming up?
Several powerful currents run through it. First and foremost, definitely this relentless pursuit of knowledge, the very essence of the middle row, and the idea of initiation into, well, profound mysteries.
Right.
This figure is driven, driven to unlock divine wisdom, to understand the secrets of the underworld. It kind of mirrors our own curiosity digging into this material today.
I do feel a bit of kinship with him, I admit. What else was driving this lover of knowledge?
Well, his relationship with the divine is absolutely central. Thoth, the god of wisdom himself, apparently treats Marrow almost like a son.
Really? Like a favorite child?
Almost, yes. It suggests this powerful idea of mentorship, a direct line for transmitting deep understanding from the god to the dedicated learner.
A kind of divine apprenticeship. And it wasn't all just thinking deep thoughts, was it? You mentioned participation.
Exactly. There's a very clear desire to be actively involved in the grand cosmic events, the traditional journey through the underworld.
Like joining the sun god on his boat.
Precisely that. Joining Ra in his solar bark, engaging in that fundamental battle between order and chaos, good and evil. These aren't just abstract ideas for him, they're aspirations. It shows the huge cosmological scope of the Book of Thoth.
Wow. From philosophy seminar to cosmic battlefield.
Yeah.
It's quite a vision of the intellectual life. What about this lake of life that's mentioned? It sounds powerful.
It does, doesn't it? The commentary links it to the Flamen Sea, the lake of fire, which we see elsewhere in Egyptian thought.
Okay.
It suggested this might be the primordial source, the materia prima, if you like, where existence begins. And it's even connected to the revival, the regeneration of Osiris.
Osiris.
So it adds this really rich mythological layer, weaving together the philosophical quest with these core creation and resurrection myths.
So knowledge isn't just about the now, it's about connecting to the very source of being. And I was really intrigued by the comment that even the hieroglyphs themselves were seen differently here.
Oh, absolutely captivating. The commentary on line 7 of Papyrus B, Arrow 2, it describes the hieroglyphic signs as if they're alive, as animate beings talking with the creator god.
Living symbols.
Yes. Which is quite distinct from how we usually think of hieroglyphs in Egypt. It gives the act of writing itself the very tools of knowledge, this incredible sense of agency, life.
That changes everything, doesn't it? Turns static text into dynamic players in the cosmic drama. Now, the outline mentions some specific tricky or interesting passages. Were there any bits that really stood out to you as particularly puzzling or revealing?
Well, there are definitely lines that scholars are still scratching their heads over. The ones listed under remarks on D lines without parallel.
Right, the ones with no known comparison.
Exactly. They remind us just how much is still unknown, still being deciphered. And then there are those textual variants we talked about, like the slight differences in the opening lines of Papyri B01, CO4.2, and F10. They all seem to be variations on an introduction, but the nuances might point to different understandings or emphasis within the tradition.
Like different philosophical schools putting their own subtle spin on things. Can you give an example of a specific comment or line that really opens a window onto the sort of cultural world behind the text?
Okay, how about the discussion of plants and growth in VO1, lines 1 to 2? The exact plants are debated, but it clearly connects the wisdom in the Book of Thoth to the natural world, maybe agricultural cycles or the symbolism of plant life.
Knowledge rooted in nature.
Could be. And then there's the mention of tools of fighting in VR1, line 18, and CO4.8, line 3. That ties back to the Macraw being active in those cosmic struggles we mentioned. It's not just passive learning.
The scholar armed for battle.
In a sense. And there are subtleties, too, like the wordplay upon, really on the signs for Yale meaning lake of life, and Yai meaning fate, in CO4.1, line 7.
Clever.
fairy. And it links into the Osiris myth again. It shows real linguistic sophistication, weaving different religious ideas together. Or the list of animals in CO 4.1, line 8, probably symbolic, but we're still figuring out exactly how.
Okay.
Even passages that seem to question authority, like in B01, lines 1 to 2, they hint at an intellectual world where asking questions was encouraged, not just accepting dogma.
A real salon of the mind, as you said, where ideas were debated.
I think so, and you see the McCrew himself speaking up. In the commentary on line 11 of B02, he talks about performing rituals and battling against base, maybe aspects of the soul.
Interesting.
He wants to know about the sacred ibises, where they live, B02 commentary, line 2. It's a very specific, perhaps esoteric quest for knowledge. Then there's a mention of heaven and the four supports of the earth, B02 commentary, line 3, just a glimpse of their cosmology.
These fragments really are like little keyholes into a huge, complex room.
They really are. The disciple takes counsel with his own heart, B02 commentary, line 5, that points to inner wisdom, intuition being important. He vows to worship Thoth and Seshat, the goddess of writing, B02 commentary, line 6, reinforcing that divine link.
Right.
And he literally descends into the underworld to learn about who lives there, B02 commentary, line 10. That shows incredible dedication.
Absolutely. Courage, too.
We even get praise for the creator god and these 10 upper Egyptian vultures, B02 commentary, line 3, and 9 lower Egyptian vultures, B02 commentary, line 4. Maybe linked to the Ennead group of gods, hints at complex theology woven in.
Vultures as sacred symbols. Fascinating. Another layer to peel back.
Definitely. And the idea that the god understands animal languages, baboons and ibises are specifically mentioned, B02 commentary, lines 8 and 10. That's quite evocative.
It really is.
Then the disciple uses salt as a metaphor for ritual actions, B02 commentary, line 9. Scholars think this might point to medicinal uses or maybe rituals not related to death, broadening our view. And finally, there are mentions of ceremonies linked to the House of Life, the Scriptorium, and something called the Chamber of Darkness, FO19. Plus, there's a bit about questioning a dream, B06 112 to 14, which might suggest dream incubation practices. It all paints a picture of a really rich ritual life surrounding this knowledge.
It sounds like a world just humming with intellectual and spiritual activity all captured in these little snapshots.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the language itself has a special quality. It's not just dry scholarship.
Oh, far from it. The Book of Thoth seems to blend scholarly precision with, well, a real metaphorical richness.
Okay.
The language suggests this deep interplay between intellectual rigor and an artistic way of seeing the world. It really does feel like the minutes from that mytho-academic salon we talked about.
Yes.
Where intricate ideas, both philosophical and mythological, were explored with seriousness, but also maybe a kind of sacredness.
A mytho-academic salon. I really love that phrase. It captures that mix of deep thought and imaginative spark perfectly. So, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, what are the key things we should take away from this look at the enigmatic Book of Thoth?
Well, I think we've seen it's a really multifaceted work. It's centered on this intense search for knowledge, yes, but also a deep personal connection with the divine. And the figure of Meth, the lover of knowledge, really stands out as this timeless symbol of, the human drive to understand the big mysteries.
Absolutely.
We've also seen the challenges, but also the rewards of working with ancient texts that only survive in fragments. And we've had these fascinating glimpses into Egyptian cosmology and intellectual life that are, well, a bit off the beaten path. They offer a different perspective.
And even broken as it is, the Book of Thoth really reminds us how intellectually vibrant and complex the ancient world can be.
It certainly does. It highlights that traditions, maybe distant from our own, could have these incredibly sophisticated blends, philosophy, myth, art, all woven together in ways we're maybe only just starting to really appreciate.
This whole discussion has me thinking about, but everything we don't have. Given the Matur's quest and the fact that this complex work only survives in bits and pieces, what other lost traditions might be out there, still waiting? Traditions holding similar intricate mixes of philosophy, myth, art, just waiting for their own craze to stumble upon them and bring them back to light? It really makes you ponder the sheer scale of lost knowledge, doesn't it? And the journey of discovery that's still ongoing.